On January 5, 1997, in her 23rd floor apartment in Bronx, New York City, USA, Rosemary Penta, an elderly school teacher aged 64, was enjoying her day off when tragedy struck on January 6. One of Rosemary's neighbors noticed that Rosemary's lights had been on since midnight of January 5. When she decided to check up on her, she came face to face with an unspeakable scene. Rosemary Penta's cold, lifeless body lying untouched on her kitchen table amid bloodied evidence from where she had come. Before calling the authorities, this neighbor collapsed to the floor, sobbing in horror at what could only be described as an act of extreme cruelty towards an elderly schoolteacher. Who could have committed such an heinous crime against such a vulnerable individual? Today's case takes us to Bronx, one of New York City's boroughs. Co-op City in the Bronx is widely known, while other notable attractions in this borough include Yankee Stadium, Bronx Zoo, and New York City Botanical Gardens. Bronx offers affordable rent while being close to other high-end boroughs like Manhattan. However, the Bronx does have its share of risks. Only 14% of U.S. neighborhoods are safer than it with violent crime rate, 1 Wyoming 28, making it a highly dangerous location. Rosemary Penta, born July 28, 1932, and living alone at 140 Allah Place in Co-op City of the Bronx for 25 years before moving out and marrying at age 70, was brutally murdered on March 10, 1997 in her own apartment. Although little is known of her early life or relationships, it is certain she never married and mostly kept to herself for most of her adulthood. Although she led a quiet existence with only occasional outings with some neighbors in her building and school teaching as her occupation. Eventually, though, her life became monotonous until one fateful morning when Rosemary would emerge and would spend time talking with neighbors whom she had become close over time and would come out and see people she knew from before, leaving on March 10, 1997 when she would step outside one last time before leaving. On January 5, 1997 in the Bronx, it was an unusually cold day, so Rosemary decided to stay at home. Unfortunately, on Monday morning, January 6, 1997, she never arrived for school where she worked despite repeated phone calls, disruption of pin-drop silence in her apartment, no answer from Rosemary on her cell phone number, and lights staying on all night in Rosemary's apartment. This raised concern from one of Rosemary's neighbors. When no response came back during the day, they decided at 6:15 p.m. to check up on Rosemary before leaving her own apartment, and checked up on her in her apartment and found Rosemary and decided on her behalf. At 6:15 p.m. that evening came knocked on Rosemary's doorbell. Rosemary was home when they found her at 6:15 p.m., where they found her. Beginning when she arrived at Rosemary's apartment door, her neighbor felt unnerved by its proximity. As soon as she entered, however, her worst fears came true when she entered Rosemary's kitchen and saw Rosemary lying lifeless in a pool of blood, prompting shrieks of horror before quickly notifying the authorities, who soon after sent out Detective George Wood and Sergeant Curtis Oates from New York Police Department to inspect the crime scene. She called out for Rosemary but received no answer. While searching the apartment, she happened upon the kitchen area, where Rosemary lay dead with multiple stab wounds on her body, still lodged deep into her back, proof that Rosemary's death must have been extremely agonizing for those present. Detective Wood remembered finding up to 25 stab wounds on Rosemary, including several in her neck area and 1 or 2 wounds to her head, with defensive wounds on her right hand, suggesting she fought with someone before succumbing. Additionally, Rosemary's throat had been cut open, as evidenced by defensive bruises on her hands, suggesting resistance from Rosemary herself against their attacker. As the two engaged in their struggle outside Rosemary's apartment in the lobby, detectives discovered more evidence to back their theory. Bloodstains on a wall near an elevator but no trace inside led them to search the staircase of their building. On the 10th floor there was another trail of blood leading up a flight of stairs. This gave rise to their belief that at some point during their struggle, Rosemary had managed to wound her attacker during a struggle between the two parties. Detectives were convinced that the blood found smeared across an elevator wall and staircase 13 floors below Rosemary's apartment belonged to her killer, giving detectives an idea of how he might have left. At first, they considered taking an elevator with blood-covered hands to press its button while leaving a trail on the wall, but maybe someone in it suspected them as it took too long, or someone saw through their messy appearance. Therefore, it seemed best for them to take the stairs instead and leave without being noticed. Exactly what happened. Bloodstains were strong evidence in Rosemary's murder case, yet didn't provide detectives with enough clues as to who might have committed it. Samples were collected and preserved for future testing and use. An autopsy later confirmed she had been stabbed 39 times. 8 wounds had occurred on her back alone. Furthermore, the knife found jammed into Rosemary was part of a kitchen set belonging to Rosemary herself, which led investigators to conclude her murder likely was not premeditated. They theorized that when Rosemary's attacker entered her apartment, initially they didn't intend to kill her, but when a struggle ensued, they did so anyway, and since several items were missing from Rosemary's place, it appeared like theft was their motive for doing so. Soon after Rosemary was murdered, her funeral was held at Granby Cemetery, Hartford County, Connecticut, USA, with family and friends present to pay their respects and lay her to rest. Unfortunately, months passed with no significant progress being made on this case despite strong evidence and theories to follow. Soon enough, though, New York police departments diverted their focus away from Rosemary and focused instead on another murder investigation. Her case went cold. More than 2 years later, in May 1999, Detective Kevin Lawler from the NYPD Cold Cases Squad was assigned Rosemary's case and began reviewing its file. While doing this research, he developed an idea for moving forward with it. He requested that any blood found at the crime scene be entered into CODIS to compare with any samples provided from known persons who have provided DNA samples. Detective Lawler sought assistance from Detective Mark Tanz in re-examining blood samples found on the elevator wall and staircase, and developed a DNA profile of Rosemary's killer that could be uploaded into CODIS, a nationwide database. They now had only to wait and hope for a match. Detective Lawler received word from the New York Police Crime Lab that blood recovered at Rosemary's crime scene had matched with that of Charles Jones, 28 years old at that time, through CODIS. Detective Lawler had long anticipated this phone call, and once he received it, he wasted no time investigating further into Jones's genetic link to make sure nothing had been overlooked. After performing a background check, he found some very startling information, or learned of Jones's extensive criminal past, including a past robbery where he attacked his victim with a knife. At first, Jones wasn't suspected in Rosemary's killing. However, since he had been imprisoned after pleading guilty to robbery and assault charges committed against another Co-op City resident on August 13, 1998, he was required to submit a DNA sample before being released on August 10, 2001. CODIS accepted Jones's DNA profile on August 20, 2001, and found it was consistent with that belonging to Rosemary's killer. At the time of Rosemary's murder, he lived nearby in Co-op City. Though this evidence strengthened Detective Lawler's case against Charles Jones, it still wasn't enough for her to charge him with Rosemary's murder. Although blood sample evidence placed him within Rosemary's apartment, where the killing had taken place, creating another challenge and prompting additional information and proof. To put Jones behind bars. Theory states that the perpetrator of this homicide entered the building with intent to rob someone, looking for an opportunity to gain entry to someone's apartment. Since his blood had traveled some distance before arriving at that 5th-floor hallway, they sought to understand how it got there. After unsuccessfully tracking him down through his parole officer and discovering an arrest warrant against him, their plan became to collect him up and talk with him directly. Unfortunately, when they arrived at Jones's apartment, they learned he wasn't there, but his family had covered for him. As soon as the detectives arrived at Jones's place, they were informed that he wasn't home at that moment, so they should come back later since there wasn't any solid evidence against him yet. Being extremely cautious about their case was imperative. One misstep could mean everything going downhill quickly. They wanted no member of Jones's family learning why they were visiting. Any news could give him another opportunity for escape. As a precautionary measure, they left a message for Jones, saying they wanted only to speak with him in regards to an outstanding traffic violation issued earlier. 2 days later, Jones took the bite and came into the precinct to discuss his traffic violation. What followed next was key, as Jones would soon discover the real purpose for questioning. Detectives tried to create an inviting environment before confronting Jones directly. They offered lunch and soda as comfort measures before beginning interrogation after just 30 minutes of being friendly towards Jones. When asked by detectives if he had ever been at a 140 Alcott Place, Jones initially denied it, but after hearing that his blood had been discovered there at the same time as the murder, he changed his story and claimed he used to deliver groceries and had cut himself on a shopping cart, thus possibly accounting for why his blood could be found there at that same moment as murder occurred. After being pressed further by detectives who asked how this could possibly explain itself, he eventually admitted being inside the building for a while prior to confessing. At first, Jones was still not fully cooperative, prompting detectives to question and interrogate him extensively. They even showed him images from the crime scene to try and induce a confession from him. Finally, after hours of interrogation, he finally confessed and proposed a plea bargain, offering an 8-year term in exchange for his confession. According to Jones's account of what transpired that night, Rosemary attacked him first and claimed self-defense as the motive. Detectives, however, had their doubts regarding Jones's story, as it seemed unlikely that such a physically powerful individual like Jones could defend themselves against such an elderly and much smaller woman like Rosemary Pacente. Jones was nonetheless arrested for robbery in Rosemary Pacente's death, charged with robbery but eventually plead guilty and received 19-year sentence in January 2002 for first-degree manslaughter conviction, pled guilty on January 11, 2002 to first-degree manslaughter charges related to Rosemary Pacente's death. Charles Jones's capture provided relief to many Bronx residents, particularly Rosemary's neighbors and friends. Her case had remained an unsolved mystery for nearly 4 years. Detectives used DNA technology to solve more cold cases and bring justice for victims and their loved ones. Jones confessed differently than what had been theorized, raising questions as to whether he was withholding information from authorities. Jones was linked to another assault from 1998, prompting further questions as to whether there might be additional incidents where Jones went undetected. Crystal Rogers lived in Bardstown, Kentucky, with her partner Brooks and 2-year-old son Eli, as well as 4 additional children she had from her 2015 marriage, and that ended shortly before the incident occurred. Bardstown is widely known as the bourbon capital worldwide, but with only 14,000 residents. Crystal was Tommy Ballard and Cher Ballard's youngest child. By all accounts, they were extremely close. Crystal worked 2 jobs to ensure her children's well-being was taken care of properly. Crystal, Eli, and Brooks visited his parents' 245-acre farm over 4th of July weekend 2015. Crystal dropped 2 children off with her ex-husband before leaving 2 with babysitters on July 4, 2015. Brooks awakened early with Eli beside him, but found no trace of Crystal. Even her car wasn't in the driveway. However, Brooks didn't report this mysterious disappearance at first, since he wasn't concerned she might just have gone out with friends late into the night before returning later than expected in the morning. Apparently, though, as it often did happen from time zone differences, or simply not making their return time. After numerous unsuccessful attempts to reach her on July 3rd, Crystal's family became extremely worried. Her mother, Sherry Ballard, reported her missing 2 days later on July 5th. The newspaper reported that she told Brooks she would take her to the police to report her as missing, and he agreed that it was the appropriate thing to do. Tommy Ballard found her maroon 2007 Chevrolet Impala with a flat tire near mile marker 14 of the Bluegrass Parkway on 5 July. Keys still inside its ignition, as well as her purse and cell phone had been left inside. Crystal's car was found with its driver's seat shifted out of its usual place, and her family quickly realized she wasn't driving alone. Unfortunately, finding her vehicle did not yield any useful leads on where to look for her. Eventually, her family announced a $25,000 reward for information leading to her abduction. Cher Ballard of her family offered with tears in his eyes, "We love her, and hope we can find her," with tears running down his cheeks, adding, "But until then, we just hope she can be found." Community involvement was immense as strangers and relatives from far and wide set out searching every inch of Nelson County and its surroundings for victims. Sammy Johnson of the Ballard family stated, "We have searched every inch of water, home, farm, and well as wells and sinkholes where she may be." According to reports, they held strong suspicions against Brooks for being involved with Crystal's disappearance. Crystal's sister claimed in an interview that Brooks never offered to search or help the family of Crystal, or assist with search efforts in any capacity. Brooks admitted their relationship was tenuous, but strongly denied any responsibility in her disappearance, stating, "I am totally innocent of this." In spite of criticisms from Crystal's family, he claimed he was helping out in some form with search efforts in the background. After Crystal's vehicle was located on July 8th, Brooks was brought in for investigation by Nelson County Sheriff's Office and told that he and Crystal were on a date the evening she last seen. Brooks stated they fed cows, went for a late-night walk, and returned home only to sleep together in bed when Crystal had already been using her smartphone to access social media apps on her device. His narrative did not add up or make sense in other aspects. At nightfall, it had rained heavily, and it made little sense for Brooks and Crystal to walk in a field together at that same time. Nelson County Detective John Snow was conducting the investigation, noting the disparities in their narrative, yet Brooks insisted he had no part in her disappearance. John Snow questioned Brooks in the taped interview regarding an early morning call with an unknown number, the night Crystal disappeared. Brooks, Crystal, and the children had been traveling home in their car at that time when this call came through. Detective Snow questioned Brooks as to who had called, and Brooks reluctantly revealed the number belonged to Steve Lawson, whom Brooks revealed was one of Steve Lawson's employees. Brooks admitted to Detective Snow that he could not recall why Steve had called so long ago, prompting her to have Brooks contact Steve directly in the interrogation area. Steve claimed he called Brooks about rental property. Brooks told him to speak to Katie, who would follow up with Steve following their conversation. But Brooks immediately corrected him by informing him it should have been Crystal instead. Detective Snow questioned Brooks on why he told Steve Lawson that Crystal would call back later when she was sitting right beside him in his vehicle at that moment. Brooks offered as an explanation that he did not want to disturb Crystal during her work-related issues and not pester her with unnecessary phone calls or messages. Nick Hall, Brooks's brother and a Bardstown police officer, was the one who first contacted Brooks via his cell phone when aware that he was being interrogated by detectives. Nick advised his sibling not to contact police. Nick had been summoned by officials from his city the previous evening to testify before an unidentified grand jury. This led police to suspect his possible involvement with Crystal's death. At this stage, Nick could no longer cooperate with the sheriff's office. However, after being interrogated by Kentucky State Police, he agreed to undergo polygraph examinations. After being approached with the FBI, Nick finally took an exam for polygraphs on 20th of July. When confronted by what the examiner found from his test results, Bardstown Police Chief McCubbin raised grave concern with him over what had transpired from them and claimed Nick had lied during their examination, upon which Nick responded by declaring, "I don't care what your computer results say about me, being considered an untrustworthy liar, and I don't appreciate being called one by others." Tommy and Sherry Ballard, Crystal's parents, started seeking custody of 2-year-old Ely, the child she shared with Brooks. On August 8, 2015, at court hearing, they finally saw Brooks again after Crystal disappeared. Tommy said afterward, "During eye contact between me and him, there was eye contact between us both. My grandchild seemed content that day compared with any others around him, and thus the decision was made at that time that Eli would stay with Brooks." 3 months after Crystal was reported missing, authorities from Nelson County Sheriff's Office declared her deceased on 16 October 2015 at their press conference. Nick Hall was fired from Bardstown Police Department due to interfering with their investigation of Crystal's disappearance. Police accuse him of warning his brother about an interview and instructing them not to talk with the detectives. Nick later informed Kentucky State Police that he only spoke with his brother to inform them they may be trying to scare him, and that he needed to take measures in order to safeguard himself. Kentucky State Police officially charged Brooks as an individual involved with Crystal's disappearance this October, with 8 documents that led them to believe he was their main suspect and direction. Hal denied these accusations against him. "My family's name has been ruined over an issue that does not pertain to me and requires lots of energy and effort. Driving past without appearing as though I am being dishonest is becoming tiresome and unreasonable, since there is no reason for an attorney, since I am innocent. For me, this seems ridiculous. For myself, this situation seems ridiculous." Police released video footage of both Hal brothers' interviews. Additionally, in December 2015, the local paper announced that police had arrested Danny Singleton on 38 counts of false swearing for lying under oath before an unnamed grand jury investigating Crystal's disappearance investigation. Singleton is close associate and long-term employee of Brooks. After being held for 6 months, he pled guilty and was released. An investigator from a private firm discovered a white Buick to be key evidence after discovering it was in the garage at Hal Farm on the night Crystal disappeared. Evidence showed Anna Whitesides owned an white Buick that she sold shortly after Crystal vanished. Police issued a subpoena requiring the 82-year-old woman to appear before a grand juror for questioning in June 2016. Subpoenaed for use as evidence disposal, the car was cleaned out and offered for sale to prevent evidence being discovered. Anna Whitesides invoked her Fifth Amendment rights and refused to testify before an impartial jury, for fear that giving testimony would incriminate herself further. Whitesides' lawyer Jason Floyd informed the court, "In a high-profile, fast investigation case such as this one, many things could come together to trap an elderly woman like Whitesides who is 82 years old, according to Mr. Floyd." Anna Whitesides' confession and vehicle details were enough for police. A judge decided to keep any legal proceedings regarding Whitesides confidential, although Crystal has never been found or charged with her disappearance. Crystal was missing for approximately 1 year prior to August 2016, when police conducted a more intensive search using 14 dead dog teams across 300 acres in search of Hal family farm and Crystal. Jon Snow reported, "There may have been an incident involving Crystal on Hal Farm." Anna Whitesides' house, as well as those of Nick Hal, his brother and Rosemary Hal, were examined in order to uncover evidence such as DNA or human remains. Jon Snow stated afterwards, "I am optimistic. I believe we are heading in the correct direction, although this journey has been long, but I feel we're getting closer." Brooks's then-lover Crystal Morin was arrested after she was caught ripping down signs supporting Crystal Rogers' case and family in Bardstown. Following Crystal Rogers' disappearance and her family's dispersal from Bardstown, signs supporting them could be found all around town and were stolen by Crystal Morin. Sherry Ballard expressed her opinion. Crystal could have apologized by simply saying, "I apologize for my actions," but instead tried to defend herself with false claims of guilt instead of apologize. Instead, she attempted to defend herself with accusations. Tommy Ballard searched daily for Crystal and even initiated an independent investigation on her behalf. 13 months after Crystal disappeared on November 19, 2017, her devoted father prepared to embark on a hunting excursion at Ed Brent Lake property with their 12-year-old grandchild and attendant. Tommy Ballard was attacked by an individual and shot in the chest. Unfortunately, he did not survive his injuries and passed away at 54. Nelson County Coroner's Office has reported that Crystal's father was shot once before the bullet exited through his back. Sher Ballard believed he had been shot while close to finding their daughter, whom had gone missing. According to newspaper accounts, his death may have been related to searching for their missing child. Sher Ballard had long been obsessed with finding his wife Crystal and was the prime figure in their search efforts. He believes that he was targeted, having seen himself being watched over for weeks prior to being shot dead. Anna Whitesides' home was searched after she was shot dead, yet nothing was discovered there. Commissar Rick Sanders hired 2 retired troopers to investigate a series of high-profile and unsolved cases in Bardstown and surrounding areas, including her murder. Crystal Ballard, as well as her dad. Tommy Ballard had died recently, and this caused them to go in search of any information regarding it. At that time, Crystal's mother was trying to gain custody over Eli Crystal's youngest son, as Brooks was sole guardian of him. Nelson Circuit Judge Stephen Hayden issued his final ruling regarding this custody dispute and found there to be clear and convincing evidence of strong hostility between Brooks and members of the Ballard family, such as Brooks' mother, and that could cause psychological harm for their child. Cher Ballard filed a petition with her late husband's estate seeking grandparent visitation rights shortly after Crystal went missing, telling local papers, "I have done all that the court requires of me, yet still cannot visit my grandson. My daughter claims the boy as her own, and I refuse to acknowledge he's not my child, though they would like for me to remove him from her life, something which I'm no longer willing to do," according to this decision. Following that ruling, numerous custody hearings were held at trial court level. Ramon Pina was elected sheriff of Nelson County following former Sheriff Ed Mattingly's departure, serving as primary investigators in Crystal's disappearance case. Ramon stated his resolve in solving it and told reporters they have an idea what occurred with Crystal, and their job is to find enough details and evidence to make an arrest possible. Over time, Crystal's family never stopped fighting for justice in her disappearance, broadcasting it via true creamy podcasts and TV series. Case of Mother of Five Crystal Rogers has inspired podcasts, documentaries, and many reports. The Disappearance Crystal Rogers is a crime-themed series. Bourbon Town Mystery, produced with help from HLN Investigations team, presents its third season. This docu-series delves deeply into the mysterious circumstances of Crystal Rogers' disappearance. Various crime dramas have focused upon this case since her disappearance. Crystal's family erected posters throughout Bardstown and nearby communities in search of any details surrounding her disappearance, which had left law enforcement officials puzzled, her family infuriated, and Bardstown struggling with an unexplained tragedy for years. John Snow, the detective in charge of Crystal's case, retired after one final interview wherein a reporter asked whether her body had ever been found. Upon hearing that response, he answered in the affirmative. Nelson County Sheriff Chief Deputy Jode Gillang would shortly thereafter become her principal detective within months. In 2019, Crystal's family held a memorial service and stated, "Every day is difficult, despite everyone telling her it will get easier." A vigil for prayer was held not only to remember Crystal, but also in hopes of finding answers about her whereabouts. Her favorite color pink was prevalent throughout, including pink t-shirts and ribbons, as well as a balloon released at the close of the evening by Cher Ballard, who said it was encouraging seeing people continue showing support throughout these many years. She plans on taking Crystal home, regardless of the length. Before Crystal disappeared, her household was extremely close. Though it has been difficult for the children, I do not want them to give up hope as God works miracles. And there's always hope. With regard to clues in the case, Cher expressed confidence in the police to find Crystal. Court records reveal a second hearing for Crystal Ballard's youngest child took place on September 10, 2020, and new evidence was presented during this hearing. On October 5, 2020, Judge Hayden denied temporary visitation rights to Cher Ballard. Cher Ballard. Hayden determined that the child had an intimate relationship with Brooks, whom the judge described as an attentive father figure. Brooks testified in court that their son spends all of his time with his mother, him, and Crystal Maupin, as his only three immediate family members. Judge Hayden stated that while they believe Cher Ballard's testimony was honest and they didn't intentionally violate the law, the court is uncertain that they can uphold their vows because of their strong dislike for Brooks. Judge Hayden further commented, stating, "It would be fair to suggest there exists an irreparable gap between the parties that may never be closed." July 2020 marked 5 years since Crystal had last been seen at Bardstown. Her disappearance caused widespread attention, but still no answers or evidence had surfaced of where she might have gone. For the first time ever, Kylie, one of Crystal's 5 children, sat down with a radio station and spoke openly about life without her mother. Kylie stated, "Waking up every morning not being able to say, 'Hey Mom, what are we going to do today?' Like normal things, small details matter more than big things. Millions that she missed out on all these years now." Kylie was only 14 when her mom went missing, yet still recalls texting and calling to reach her, but with no response or way to contact her. Graduations became particularly difficult due to this experience. "As I graduated high school, it was amazing to see all the children and their mothers so happy for each other. Although my mom felt proud and I knew she wanted me there physically too, it was difficult for her to stand aside while looking around at other moms." Kylie admitted that, following such events, she often uses journals and her mother to relay details from that day to her mother and share with her what happened. Over time, her family raised funds in an attempt to gather evidence that could lead to arrests for Crystal and Tommy Ballard trials. When Kylie was 19 years old, there was even an impressive $100,000 reward. As long as justice does not arrive for Crystal's death, her family made one simple request: keep praying and do not allow hope to slip away. Your presence brings us hope and helps us keep pushing forward. Federal authorities made their intention known in August to assume control of the investigation into Crystal Hall's disappearance, known and issued search warrants at several homes belonging to her family. In June and July 2017, the FBI assumed the roles of Kentucky State Police and Nelson County Sheriff's Office as principal investigators of this investigation, with over 150 agents serving search warrants on 3 properties owned by Hall and his family members. An FBI Louisville spokesperson previously noted that 3 locations had been thoroughly explored over time, particularly Woodland Springs subdivision, where Brooks Hall constructed several homes shortly after Crystal vanished. Federal agents working together with Nelson County Highway Department personnel surveyed an area suitable for driveway installation. Once determined, concrete pieces, as well as other items from outside an apartment building, were stored away securely before concealing them from view. Photographers working for the local newspaper were able to witness police using a jackhammer to clear away driveways of houses in an estate subdivision. Officers allowed only certain cars into the subdivision during this investigation and reporters were barred. Crystal's mother noted, "I don't believe they would randomly choose driveways without some justification. My daughter had been missing for some time while Hall was building in this area." On August 27, 2021, the FBI made public their investigations in this area and announced that an object of interest had been discovered from concrete in one of the homes they searched recently. Furthermore, they mentioned knowing of residents in Bardstown who may have knowledge about this case, calling upon them to come forward if possible. Some properties owned by Brooks Hall, while another belonged to his brother, Nick Hall. On September 7, 2021, the FBI made public their announcement that their search in Bardstown had concluded, and several items of interest had been sent off to a laboratory located in Virginia for testing. Sherry spoke to a local newspaper with hopes that her family can learn the truth of what had occurred with their daughter. She told the paper, "I believe that this is where investigation should take place, as they can give me information here." Sherry indicated her desire to know what occurred with her daughter but acknowledged it would be difficult. She hopes she can handle being confronted with their announcement. Having been waiting 6 years, closure has long been needed, as do the children who want answers about what they may have experienced and been told about by Sherry herself and others involved. This will be very challenging on us. To date, the FBI has provided no further details about items of interest submitted for testing by Virginia laboratories. In October 2021, spokesperson Katie Anderson informed a local newspaper that no new updates had been received regarding the ongoing Crystal Rogers investigation. In 2021, the FBI offered a reward of $25,000 to any individual or persons, providing information leading to the identification, arrest, and conviction of anyone responsible for Crystal's disappearance. Crystal's case remains unsolved due to being passed around between various agencies. Sherry Ballard disclosed during an interview in 2022 that her daughter's children at the time of Crystal's death were aged 21, 19, 17 and 9. Crystal was an extraordinary girl. We miss her dearly. She was an incredible daughter, always kind and helpful to all she encountered, even offering to stay with a friend who couldn't leave due to illness. Because we were a close family unit, and I would do nothing different from any other mother for my daughter's well-being. Crystal's mother expressed hope for some sort of closure as well. She recalls vividly the day she visited the station of police to report Crystal as missing and was told it could take up to 1 year before any answers come through. Ballard expressed this shock with tears rolling down his cheeks. In October 2022, the FBI conducted another raid at Brooks Farm for 5 days and announced they would not share what information was gathered during their investigations. Brooks Hall owned this property along with her mother. Brooks Hall Sr. Daniel Cameron appointed a special prosecutor in January 2023 to investigate Crystal and her father's murder cases. On July 3, 2023, 8 years after Crystal disappeared, her agency announced substantial progress had been made toward reaching a proper conclusion of this case and promised, "We will follow every lead possible until those responsible for her disappearance are held accountable." On September 7, 2023, the investigation took a dramatic new turn when reports surfaced of Joseph Lawson, 32 years old and currently accused, being accused of participating in the probe. Joseph Lawson had never been officially identified as a suspect or had any connection to Crystal's case before his arrest marked an important shift in recent years. While not being charged with her murder, Joseph is now facing accusations of conspiracist activities against him. Authorities suspect he's involved with some aspect of planning or carrying out actions which led to Crystal's presumed death, as no body had yet been located. Investigators believed Lawson may have hidden, destroyed, removed, or altered evidence so as to derail proceedings against her. Lawson was charged with conspiracy on July 24, as well as tampering evidence in June, but neither case could be resolved due to his hospitalization and Zoom while being brought before Nelson Circuit Court for trial. Lawson appeared before Nelson Circuit Court, and his indictment was read aloud before the judge accepted his plea of not guilty for both counts, with $50,000 set as bond on one and $500,000 on another, conspiracy count and involvement in tampering with physical evidence respectively. Although Crystal wasn't specifically mentioned in the indictment, the charge outlined that on July 3, 2015 and/or 4, 2015, defendant committed the criminal conspiracy with the intent to take away life by signing contracts to assist any one or more of those involved in planning, executing, soliciting, or attempting to commit the offense when either themselves or one of their co-conspirators intentionally committed suicide. Kevin Coleman, Lawson's attorney, confirmed the charges related to Crystal's case but refused to provide further details. Lawson is scheduled to appear before a court for an initial pre-trial conference on the 26th of October 2023. Lawson had an extensive criminal history, which included methamphetamine possession, burglary, trespassing, and assault charges. Investigators were not certain as to whether Steve Lawson, who called Brooks Hall the night Crystal disappeared, was related to Joseph Lawson. However, an exhaustive lookup of public records published by newspapers revealed the following information: that Steve Lawson in Bardstown, Kentucky is related to Joseph and that they share a common birthday. Till Ballard, Crystal's grandpa, confirmed to the local paper that Lawson has been arrested by FBI. Mr. Ballard Sr. believed both murders may be linked and was hopeful that Lawson's arrest in Crystal's case might result in some changes regarding Tommy's shooting. Someone had to do something. Someone needed to know about Tommy, and someone needed to intervene against Tommy. Till believed Lawson may know about both murderers, although federal law prevented his exact place of residence being disclosed at this time. Lawson remains in federal custody. However, due to federal requirements, this information won't be disclosed due to federal requirements regarding federal jurisdiction and legal obligations regarding reporting requirements on federal legal requirements regarding federal requirements for legal matters regarding reporting requirements when reporting requirements arises regarding lawful authorities when reporting criminal activities are ongoing against them, and not disclosing details regarding either victim relatives who can report suspected killers that could make arrest, warranted charges brought against Tommy's shooters, as he intended stop looking. Something someone needed to change in Tommy's shooting of Tommy was made public, resulting in some kind of change by arresting someone else that someone knew about Tommy was shooting. Of Tommy being given custody, however, his exact whereabouts won't be revealed due to federal regulations requirements being revealed at all times during this case. Lawson is being held as per federal regulations regarding his exact place of residence being kept confidentially. Brooks Hall was arrested and charged with the murder of Crystal Rogers on September 27, 2023. Bail has been set at $10 million cash, and he's not allowed to communicate with Rogers' family. A statement issued by the FBI office stated their agent's dedication in finding those accountable in the case of Crystal Rogers. Today is an important step toward fulfilling that commitment. Hall was in court on October 5th and will likely face trial later that month. Another suspect could also be detained as well. Cher Ballard wrote this when the arrest was made. To say that today was overwhelming is overstatement. She said, "I've endured 8 long agonizing years to get here. To witness Brooks Hall put in handcuffs was an experience that was completely surreal to me. I've always believed that he was guilty, but now everyone knows that. I'm not sure of the feelings I experienced today. I'm sure that's all you can imagine. I would like to say thank for the FBI. God sent me an angel when they showed up at my house. I am personally familiar with the effort that a particular agent put into this case, as well as the long and exhausting hours he worked to make this happen. He never once forgot how I had been a mom as well as a wife, experiencing the most difficult time spouses and mothers can endure. I can't even imagine the impact it caused on him. This event would never have been possible without his help. Thank you for his team for all the help they provided in his office. His co-workers worked extremely difficult. I would be grateful to them for watching out for myself and our family. Thanks also for my family and friends at the Nelson County Sheriff's Office for helping in ensuring that this event took place. Thanks to both the attorney for prosecution and office." Kevin Coleman, Lawson's attorney, confirmed the charges related to Crystal's case but refused to provide further details. Lawson is scheduled to appear before a court for an initial pre-trial conference on the 26th of October 2023. Lawson had an extensive criminal history, which included methamphetamine possession, burglary, trespassing, and assault charges. Investigators were not certain as to whether Steve Lawson, who called Brooks Hall the night Crystal disappeared, was related to Joseph Lawson. However, an exhaustive lookup of public records published by newspapers revealed the following information: that Steve Lawson in Bardstown, Kentucky is related to Joseph, and that they share a common birthday. Till Ballard, Crystal's grandpa, confirmed to the local paper that Lawson has been arrested by FBI. Mr. Ballard Sr. believed both murders may be linked and was hopeful that Lawson's arrest in Crystal's case might result in some changes regarding Tommy's shooting. Someone had to do something. Someone needed to know about Tommy, and someone needed to intervene against Tommy. Till believed Lawson may know about both murderers, although federal law prevented his exact place of residence being disclosed at this time. Lawson remains in federal custody. However, due to federal requirements, this information won't be disclosed due to federal requirements regarding federal jurisdiction and legal obligations regarding reporting requirements on federal legal requirements regarding federal requirements for legal matters regarding reporting requirements when reporting requirements arises regarding lawful authorities when reporting criminal activities are ongoing against them, and not disclosing details regarding either victim relatives who can report suspected killers that could make arrest, warranted charges brought against Tommy's shooters, as he intended stop looking. Something someone needed to change in Tommy's shooting of Tommy was made public, resulting in some kind of change by arresting someone else that someone knew about Tommy was shooting. Of Tommy being given custody, however, his exact whereabouts won't be revealed due to federal regulations requirements being revealed at all times during this case. Lawson is being held as per federal regulations regarding his exact place of residence being kept confidentially. Brooks Hall was arrested and charged with the murder of Crystal Rogers on September 27, 2023. Bail has been set at $10 million cash, and he's not allowed to communicate with Rogers' family. A statement issued by the FBI office stated their agent's dedication in finding those accountable in the case of Crystal Rogers. Today is an important step toward fulfilling that commitment. Hall was in court on October 5th and will likely face trial later that month. Another suspect could also be detained as well. Cher Ballard wrote this when the arrest was made. To say that today was overwhelming is overstatement. She said, "I've endured 8 long agonizing years to get here. To witness Brooks Hall put in handcuffs was an experience that was completely surreal to me. I've always believed that he was guilty, but now everyone knows that. I'm not sure of the feelings I experienced today. I'm sure that's all you can imagine. I would like to say thank for the FBI. God sent me an angel when they showed up at my house. I am personally familiar with the effort that a particular agent put into this case, as well as the long and exhausting hours he worked to make this happen. He never once forgot how I had been a mom as well as a wife, experiencing the most difficult time spouses and mothers can endure. I can't even imagine the impact it caused on him. This event would never have been possible without his help. Thank you for his team for all the help they provided in his office. His co-workers worked extremely difficult. I would be grateful to them for watching out for myself and our family. Thanks also for my family and friends at the Nelson County Sheriff's Office for helping in ensuring that this event took place. Thanks to both the attorney for prosecution and office."
At 2 a.m. on October 31st, 1991, in Tyler, Texas, as the fall season settled in, it struck 2. Everyone was asleep in their beds except a small framed house on 29th Street at this peaceful moment, unaware that it would soon become the scene of horror for 8-year-old Chad Choice, who lay dreaming away when an intruder silently entered and abducted him out into the darkness of night. Initially considered as a runaway case due to lack of evidence, this case shifted into an investigator's nightmare when 48-hour window closed without Chad returning home. His captors may have found ways into his home without leaving any trace, taking him without trace, or ever returning for reunion with family and return. But the primary question still stands. Would Chad ever rejoin them and return home? Tyler, Texas, named after John Tyler, 10th President of the United States, is one of the largest cities in northeastern Texas and often known as Rose City due to its extensive rose production, cultivation, and processing history. Each October, it welcomes thousands of tourists. However, October 1991 brought unexpected sadness as Chad Choice mysteriously vanished without trace, souring an otherwise vibrant atmosphere. Ernest Chadwick Choice, affectionately known as Chad Choice, entered this world on April 26, 1983, in Texas. As one of 4 cherished children living within his household, Chad was highly loved by both family and particularly his mother, Karen Elaine Choice. Chad was known to make many friends easily and enjoyed spending quality time with them. Furthermore, his bond between siblings was evident, and they often spent quality time together. Chad was known for his energetic and playful nature, as evidenced by his frequent visits to the playground. Chad had an older sister named Angela Choice, who recalls that Chad loved riding bikes, scaling trees, and engaging in sports. Details on any further siblings have yet to be made public. Chad was just 8 years old, attending Mommy G. Griffin Elementary School when his life took an unexpected and tragic turn. Destiny often plays havoc, and unfortunately, Chad's destiny had already been determined. On October 31st, 1991, my birthday, the daily routine of the Choice family was abruptly altered. While preparing to attend church services and drink coffee and read, as is often my custom on such days, without disturbing Chad or his siblings, Karen rose early and went to church without waking them, as planned. Just minutes into her service, however, she received a phone call from my daughter asking where Chad had gone, to which I replied no, instead leaving him at home as planned, and she asked why I hadn't brought him along, to which she replied she searched everywhere but couldn't find him anywhere. Finally, she told her church service that her time of peace had run out, leaving Chad at home on their own accord. Karen returned home and immediately began searching the neighborhood for Chad, seeking assistance from neighbors as well. However, their collective search efforts proved fruitless, as Chad appeared to have vanished without trace or even seeming to disappear entirely into thin air. At first, we thought he was just playing a trick on us and were wandering around looking up at trees to see if he was there, but something kept bothering me. Something kept feeling off about this whole situation. Now, it was the police's turn to investigate. Karen dialed 711 and reached Tyler Police Station. Sergeant Bill Ging quickly arrived at their house soon afterward for his initial inspection, where he looked for signs of forced entry, struggle, or pry marks on their door. None were detected during this initial assessment. Ging began to wonder whether Chad might have fled home. Her initial investigation suggested this possibility. No signs of forced entry or ransacking were apparent at any point during our inspection of this building. None of the indicators that might point towards crime scenes. Karen had long held on to the belief that her son had been abducted, and as the sun set and day turned to night, her anxiety turned into fear. Fear sets in as you wonder what's happening and who he may be with, knowing it's getting dark outside and that he should come home soon. Fear gripped her heart even further as 48 hours had gone by without any sign of him. Of course, this rule of thumb doesn't always hold true, but generally, if something hasn't been resolved within 48 hours of becoming apparent, it will likely become harder and harder to tackle later on. Angela Choice provided a key piece of information during her interview with Detective Coate. She claimed her house keys had gone missing the day prior, recalling placing them by the back door of Chad's residence. This revelation raised serious concerns, suggesting the possibility of kidnap for hire, or something even more troubling. 2 days after Chad disappeared, Greg Sterling, Chad's uncle, discovered a ransom note at his business. Although hopes that Chad was alive were diminishing by this point, so another demand seemed very odd to us, thus prompting our investigation to quickly focus on kidnapping scenarios instead of waiting around, hoping he might resurface alive. As the family tried to deliver their money at the Greyhound bus station as instructed, their kidnapper did not appear. Shortly afterwards, however, our hopes were revived, only for that momentary renewal to quickly fade and remain unfulfilled as time went on and they failed to appear. Chad's mother received an anonymous phone call revealing that Chad had vanished due to an ongoing drug debt with Paco, who owned 3 Colombian drug dealers located nearby, Paco Jr., Carlos, and Greg Sterling, who collectively owed over $20,000. Although these discoveries provided insight into potential motivations behind Chad's disappearance, no definitive resolution had yet been found in his abduction case. On the 1-year anniversary of Chad's disappearance, Karen Choice found a note on her car windshield asserting that Chad was still alive and demanding $66,000 to bring him home safely. This development reignited their investigation, giving hope to Karen Choice's family that their son might yet return safely. Unfortunately, however, that hope was dashed when his kidnapper failed to contact them once more, and the case became moribund again. Time was against them. Each passing year reduced Chad Choice to an open case, as his disappearance turned cold case. 4 years later, In October 1995, an unexpected package arrived on their doorstep that seemed harmless enough. Upon opening it, however, something that would haunt Karen Choice forever became evident. There was an actual human skull inside. Part of me thought, this could be Chad, while another part said, nope, Chad is still here and alive. After providing Choice with DNA samples from her family members for analysis, the skull was sent back to the FBI for examination. DNA testing on samples taken from these relatives allowed for comparative purposes between the samples that came back. Although our DNA experts performed tests to identify Chad's skull, their efforts proved inconclusive. Therefore, the skull was shipped off to a university in Texas for further forensic anthropological analysis. Sometimes, especially in cases involving children where there are few medical or dental records available, we might use alternative techniques. If we think we know who the remains represent, for instance, we might request photographs of that individual in an attempt to compare skeletal remains with them and see which matches best. Karen was devastated to learn of Chad's fate after forensic analysis confirmed his skull belonged to him. Detectives struggled to comprehend a person capable of not only perpetrating a crime, but continuing to terrorize victims' families for years afterwards. All Karen knew was that Chad would never see another day alive and was forced to pray for justice in his behalf. Whoever was responsible for placing such an unsettling act at our family's doorstep sparked something deep within me. An anger that I hadn't experienced before rose up within me. I needed to figure out who this person was before any more time could pass. As Chad Choice's case became harder and harder to solve, another story began unfolding at Smith County Jail in early 1996. Patrick Horn was scheduled to be sentenced in federal court for credit union robberies and carjacking, in addition to murdering fruit stand owner J.C. Lazur. Credit union has been targeted for theft yet again. Two masked men with weapons enter, wearing masks, quickly rush into the tellers, catching them off guard, and demand money. It was our belief that likely these same two people had done this again, as two black males entered, wearing masks similar to previous incidents. As it became apparent that he would spend the remainder of his life behind bars or face potential execution, this man became central to Chad Choice's murder investigation when he mentioned his name during his time behind bars. Although this might have been part of a plea bargain agreement or just accidental discovery by police investigators, for them, this marked an important breakthrough in their investigations thus far. Horn was a resident in Chad Choice's neighborhood and close friend. During an interview regarding Chad's death, Horn informed investigators of who killed Chad. According to Horn's account, Chad was murdered by two Colombian drug dealers known by their street names Paco and Carlos. However, this claim would soon prove incorrect. The truth would soon emerge as this story became even more intricate. After Horn made his statement, he received in his jail cell a package containing Chad's leg bone for analysis. Jailers intercept this package addressed to Pat Horn and discover what appears to be a leg bone and a note threatening him if he divulges any information on Chad Choice. In such an event, they'd kill either himself or his family members. Horn told police that Paco and Carlos had sent the package, yet detectives felt like something was amiss with his story. After multiple questions from them, Horn insisted he had no more information other than Paco and Carlos being the culprits. Horn finally revealed something additional on May 31, 1996. He revealed to us that he had assisted Paco and Carlos with digging a grave for Chad at their instruction. He claimed to us that he too was victimized by this crime, as his only involvement was helping bury Chad. He added, "Essentially, all I'm guilty of here is helping burying him. Any involvement beyond this was strictly incidental. Horn then revealed the exact location where Chad was interred, prompting police officers to accompany him directly to 401 Sunnyside in Tyler, Horn's personal backyard. Pat Horn was always known for exaggerating his involvement with these guys. Therefore, it fueled suspicion about whether or not he really was as involved as claimed. It opens the door for us to view him as potentially being involved far more than is indicated by what he tells us. Some agents and officers dug deep. After hitting a plastic bag, they continued digging deeper until they located bone fragments and clothing items. At 4:00 p.m. that same day, detectives began digging and discovered Chad's remains along with several caliber shell casings. This discovery marked a sudden shift in their investigation, and all suspicion now rested with Patrick Horn. In June 1996, investigators immediately traveled to Athens in Texas and to a jail cell where an important piece of the puzzle would sit, one who would aid in conclusively solving this case. Athens police had taken advantage of an opportunity when we conducted a rigorous interview with him in custody and encouraged him to come forward with information. Eventually, he made his choice known. Keaton Horn was Patrick Horn's brother, who had recently been charged with violating probation terms and faced charges related to this infamous crime. With Keaton's statements as evidence, this case became concrete proof that Horn was indeed behind this misdeed. He admitted digging up and mailing Pat in jail some bones from her leg, with instructions to make the letter look like it came from Paco and Carlos as threats against Pat. Keaton demonstrated how Paco and Carlos hadn't reached out to Pat in order to threaten him. Rather, Pat himself reached out in an effort to appear threatened, which proved invaluable as an evidence break in this case. Horn's scheme to mislead investigators had finally come undone, and the solution to what had seemed an unsolvable case was finally in reach. One question still lingered, though. Why had Patrick Horn gone to such lengths, kidnapping Chad, refusing the ransom offer, and ultimately taking his life? Could you shed light on why someone could commit such an atrocious act, and do you believe his mother will ever find peace again? Please share your views. We welcome hearing them all.
12-year-old Jennifer Renee Odom was a 7th grader at Thomas E. Waitman Middle School in Wesley Chapel, Florida, in 1993. She played the clarinet in the school band and was also a barefoot water skier who often placed high in tournaments. She was the skier who climbed to the top of the human pyramid, gliding atop the water. Jennifer was born on August 25, 1980. She was the eldest daughter of Renee Converse and stepdad Clark Converse. She had a 9-year-old sister, Jessica Ann Odom, and was the granddaughter of Jim and Margie Denny. They lived in St. Joseph, a small community near Dade City, Florida. Jennifer and Jessica had a rabbit called Beanie. Jennifer also absolutely loved her Springer Spaniel, Gypsy. The two sisters built forts, rode four-wheelers, and spent summer days swimming in the creek behind their house on the family's 15-acre property. It was a crisp morning on Friday, February 19, 1993, when Jennifer Odom put on her white jeans and a white turtleneck to get ready for school. She put on a red cashmere sweater, a gift from her grandmother, over her shoulder-length chestnut-colored hair. She was slim and tan due to spending a lot of time outdoors. On that same morning, after lacing up her pair of black boots, she got into the car with her mother. The two drove 200 yards up the winding Lime Rock driveway to wait for the school bus near their mailbox. Jennifer climbed onto the bus and took her usual spot on the back seat so she and her mother could see each other until Renee, following behind, turned left to head to work. After school, at around 3 p.m., Jennifer stepped off her school bus, waved goodbye to her friends, and started walking the short 200 yards to her home. At about 4 p.m., Jennifer's sister arrived at their home from school to find it locked and unable to enter. She then called their mother to tell her that her big sister was not home yet. Renee Converse then realized Jennifer must not have made it home, so she called Jennifer's best friend, Michelle, who stated that she saw Jennifer exit the bus and begin walking home. Jennifer's mother knew something was very wrong and called the police. Within hours, deputies launched a wide-scale search, and a search party of about 400 volunteers was formed to help scour about 60 square miles of countryside. Family, friends, neighbors, and other volunteers searched for Jennifer, and law enforcement was equipped with police dogs to comb the rolling groves, pastures, and woods surrounding the tiny Pasco County town of Dade City. Every law enforcement agency in the Bay Area was looking for a blue truck that was seen in the area by some of her classmates, children riding the school bus with Jennifer. They remembered seeing an older light blue, unknown model pickup truck slowly following Jennifer down the road in the direction in which she was walking. The children described it as having a silver-painted rear bumper, not chrome, and a trailer hitch with wires hanging and pipes, or a ladder in the back. The driver was described by the children as a white male in his 40s with shoulder-length brown hair. The blue truck became the focus of the search parties, as investigators believed that the driver may have been involved in Jennifer's disappearance. As a last resort to find the truck, the FBI, as well as Hernando and Pasco County Sheriff's personnel, worked from a dock in a boathouse as divers searched Lake Rovita for the vehicle. 6 days after Jennifer vanished, on Thursday, February 25, 1993, a man and a woman searching an abandoned orange grove about 10 miles north of Jennifer's school bus stop found her badly decomposed nude body. Her body was found near a horse trail off Powell Road, south of Brooksville, amid a cluster of pine trees in the orange grove. She was found viciously assaulted and had suffered blunt force trauma to her head. Detectives said she likely lost her life there in the woods not long after her disappearance. Hernando County Sheriff Al Ninhays stated, "We are not exactly sure how long her abductor kept her captive or when exactly the slaying took place, but we are relatively confident it took place in that field." Jennifer's clothing was never found, neither the blue truck nor its driver. While Jennifer's family was still busy with her funeral arrangements, country music star Vince Gill was scheduled to sing at the local Strawberry Festival on Monday, March 1, 1993. Jennifer's stepfather, Clark Converse, said the girls had looked forward to Gill's performance for weeks, hoping they could get him to autograph photos before the concert. Clark Converse and Jessica went to the festival to fulfill Jennifer's wish that Gill autograph a photo in which Jennifer and her sister had posed with the singer at a previous concert on January 10th. Between shows, festival vice president Joe Newsom took the 3 snapshots to Gill, who was eating dinner. Jennifer's stepdad had asked that Gill autograph one for Jessica, one for Jennifer, and one for both girls. Newsom said afterward, "I told Gill this young lady had been slayed, and her dad was outside." Gill replied that he remembered hearing about the incident. He, who also had a young daughter, autographed the photos, writing on one to Jennifer, "May God be with you." As both Gill and Newsom wept, Gill then went to the night's second show. Before singing the last song, he told the audience about Jennifer. "I'm going to try to get through this the best I can," he said, his voice cracking. Gill sang his Grammy-winning hit, "I Still Believe in You," and dedicated it to Jennifer, who was tragically robbed of her life. Midway through the song, with tears running down his face, Gill asked the crowd to help him finish. Nearly 15,000 voices joined in. Radio personality Jeff Moore stood backstage and looked out at thousands of tear-stained faces. He said, "It was heart-ripping," he said afterward. Unfortunately, with no one in the community providing investigators with useful information, her case went unsolved for 13 months. Before Jennifer was abducted, on January 16, 1992, a 17-year-old girl was kidnapped as she got off a school bus in north-central Pasco County. She was found in a pool of blood behind an abandoned house, brutally attacked, assaulted, and beaten. Sheriff Ninhays said she suffered injuries to her head and skull that were very significant. She survived, but her life was forever changed, as she was paralyzed on her left side. Ninhai said she was a former honor roll student and a track and field participant and was a true victim. She was not engaged in a high-risk lifestyle. Law enforcement was able to collect DNA from the crime scene at the time, and since there were similarities between what happened to Jennifer and the unnamed girl, detectives believed the cases may be related. Both victims were adolescent girls who were abducted after getting off the school bus in Pasco County, taken to a remote field, assaulted, and abandoned with the belief they would succumb to their injuries. The other victim was found just a few miles from where Jennifer's body was found. After a series of blind alleys, the police called upon psychic Nancy Meyer, 16 months after the incident, to assist in finding the person responsible for what happened. Nancy Meyer is a psychic from Pennsylvania who has been working with police around the country for decades. According to Nancy, she had consulted in more than 300 criminal investigations and had offered critical clues more than 80% of the time. Nancy believed that two men were involved in taking Jennifer's life. She described them as white, muscular mechanics, and she said one may be a smoker with a heavy cough. The crime scene photographs were classified, therefore Nancy Meyer was not allowed to see it. Despite this, she was able to visualize two men in detail. She was taken to the site where Jennifer's body was found, and Nancy pointed out that there were belongings in a nearby area that had not yet been discovered. She was able to describe several of Jennifer's items that were still missing, including her cousin's clarinet case with the letters LO on them. She continued to give information about the perpetrators in the hope of solving the case. Detective Carlos Douglas of the Hernando County Sheriff's Office said, "Nancy Meyer was extremely accurate on some things that led us to look in other areas that we had not thought of, so we obtained a lot of information from what she had to offer." On December 2, 1994, Jennifer's unsolved case was aired on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries on national TV. After the show aired, more than 50 phone tips and even more investigative leads from around the country arrived by mail at the Hernando County Sheriff's Office. A spokesman of the Sheriff's Office said, "The show did for us what we wanted it to do. It got us some more exposure." Despite the new exposure, former Hernando County Sheriff's Major Gary Zorn Smith, who oversaw the investigation in its early years, said the investigators were stumped. He said there was a strong possibility the crime would go unsolved, and what's even worse is that if we solve it, it may take another crime to do it, he said at the time. Approximately 2 years after Jennifer's body was found, on Thursday, January 5, 1995, a couple hunting for scrap metal in a rural area of Hernando County discovered Jennifer's missing book bag and clarinet case. It was found several miles from the location of her body. Police were able to lift fingerprints from her backpack and clarinet case, from what is believed to be the person responsible. Unfortunately, there was never a hit in the database for a suspect matching these fingerprints. Over the years, the case garnered national attention and haunted the Tampa Bay region. Thousands of dollars in reward money offered for tips went unclaimed. Detectives logged tens of thousands of hours chasing leads, and Jennifer's family waited for news as the years turned to decades. Jennifer's mother, Renee Converse, wondered if it was somebody Jennifer knew. Clark Converse, Jennifer's stepfather, added, "There is a real chance that the person who did it is somebody we have contact with. If they catch someone, we're going to be thrown into the spotlight. Learning how to deal with a trial and confronting this person is going to throw us to square one in learning to deal with this." Renee said she cries a bit more each year. The reality is that Jennifer is gone and will never be in our lives again. Nothing is going to change that. She also said that the family is thankful for what they do know. "We are blessed that we have this much closure. We are not looking for her. We know where she is. It is going to be a bittersweet finale." She could still picture her 12-year-old daughter, slim and sun-kissed, waving goodbye at the back window of the Pasco County school bus. It was the last time she would see her brown-eyed firstborn girl. In 2015, Detective George Lundgren was contacted by Pasco County Sheriff Chris Nacco, who stated that new technology had led to a solid lead in the 1992 case in which the teenage girl was found alive. It was the case investigators believed was linked to Jennifer's. The odds of finding another match, Nako said, was 1 in 7.7 nonillion, a number with 30 zeros. Lundgren commented, "I think DNA is going to be a big part of Jennifer's case, as it is with any of the old cases, because items were collected. It is just now that the technology has advanced." The biological evidence found in the investigation of the 1992 case was tested before February 2015, and detectives got a full DNA profile. Investigators used a DNA procedure known as familial searching, which allows law enforcement to find a suspect by comparing male DNA left at the scene with that of family members. The shortfall of a standard DNA search is that a suspect's genetic fingerprint must be on file in the offender database for law enforcement to make a match. Sheriff Ninhai said, "Until 2015, there were no leads on that particular piece of DNA." The Florida Department of Law Enforcement compared the DNA to local DNA to see if there were any close matches, which would be a family member. The sheriff said they found the DNA match, that of Jeffrey Crum, who was in jail at the time. Investigators then obtained DNA samples from Crum's brother, father, and grandfather. A direct comparison between the DNA found in the victim and that of Crum's father found a match, leading to the indictment of Jeffrey Crum. Crum was already serving 2 life sentences for the assault and kidnapping case out of Pasco County that was prosecuted around 2015. In February 2015, the arrest and sentence of Crum gave Detective Lloyd Grant a new resolve, and Jennifer's family new hope that the person responsible would be caught. Detectives then began an intensive investigation and interviewed everyone they could find for the next several years who may have been associated with Crum around the time Jennifer was kidnapped. This information was turned over to the state attorney, and the facts and circumstances were turned over to a grand jury. On July 27, 2023, a month shy of what would have been Jennifer's 43rd birthday, officials announced that they had finally made an arrest in the case, and prosecutors would seek capital punishment against the accused. State Attorney Bill Glass made the announcement during a press conference, just after the Hernando County Sheriff's Office announced that it had charged the 61-year-old Jeffrey Norman Crum with the kidnapping, assault, and slaying of Jennifer 30 years before. Glass also said, "I have confidence that we have the right person and we have the right aggravators in this particular case to treat it as a capital punishment case. This is every parent's nightmare. This is the thing that keeps parents up at night, worried about their children." Detective George Lundgren, who had spent years investigating Jennifer's case, said, "Shock is probably the best word to describe the reaction of Jennifer's family when he told them about the arrest. He said he did it quickly because I did not want to get emotional. It is a lot for them to take in and absorb, and I can imagine it is going to take some time before it really sinks in." According to Sheriff Ninhais, every viable lead for the past 30 years, including those that came from the Pasco County Sheriff's Office, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, or private citizens, was thoroughly investigated. He added that the investigation never stopped. Hundreds of items were tested and retested every time new technology came out in the hope of finding the smoking gun to solve this case. The sheriff added that countless detectives, sworn law enforcement personnel, civilian tipsters, and countless others have had a hand in this investigation. The minute Crum was identified as a suspect in the case, Detective Lundgren went to work, putting a mosaic together like a puzzle. I can tell you that other than the conviction in a previous case, there was no other significant piece of the puzzle. Every other piece of the puzzle that brought us to this point consisted of tiny fragments that gave the state attorney and the grand jury enough confidence to indict Crum. He also said that they are searching for additional victims, as authorities fear Crum may be responsible for other crimes. A picture of him from 1993 was released, asking that anyone who recognizes him from the 1980s and 1990s contact Sheriff Ninhais. "We urge anyone who had interactions with this individual, has information on other crimes he may have committed, or may have themselves been a victim of Jeffrey Crum, to reach out to the Hernando County Sheriff's Office and speak to our cold case unit." Despite keeping a lot of information close to the vest, authorities did say that in 1992, Crum worked in construction as a drywall installer and lived on Somerset Lane in Spring Hill, the Pasco County area where Jennifer was abducted from. His residence was about 21 miles from the place where Jennifer was last seen and 12 miles from where her body was found. Officials also say that at that time, he drove a blue truck. During Thursday's press conference on July 27, 2023, Sheriff Ninhuys kept reiterating that Crum was not on the investigators' radar until the past few years. Records showed that Crum has a significant history of convictions for violent crimes. The sheriff said Crum had been arrested in the early 1980s for armed robbery in Hillsborough County. In 1985, he was charged with kidnapping, assault, and false imprisonment in Hillsborough County. He was arrested by Tampa police in 1987 for carrying a concealed weapon. In 1988, he was caught again carrying a concealed weapon and was charged with aggravated assault. In 1998, he was arrested for domestic violence in Hernando County 3 times. In 2001, he was arrested for a violation of probation in Hillsborough County. He was arrested a few years later for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon in Hernando County. In 2015, he was arrested in Pasco County for aggravated assault on a child under the age of 12. Sheriff Ninhuys stated, "He is a bad individual who enjoyed violence." Crum is already serving 2 life sentences for the assault and kidnapping case out of Pasco County that was prosecuted around 2015. He is currently in the Hernando County Jail, and Judge Kurt E. Hitzman ordered him to be held without bond and appointed a public defender to represent him. Communities in Pasco and Hernando counties were on edge after Jennifer Odom's kidnapping and slaying back then. They shared their thoughts and feelings after the news of the arrest was announced. Jeannie Cameron, the general manager at Papa Joe's Italian restaurant in Brooksville, said she and others in the community remember hearing about her disappearance all too well. "So, we all remember hearing about her disappearance, Jennifer's, and about the blue truck, and everybody was on alert, looking. I think the bottom line was finding out who did it and getting him off the streets so that another family doesn't have to be tormented. Because I really feel like the whole community was tormented until they found out the answer." Joseph Gioratan, the owner of Papa Joe's Italian restaurant, said, "Back then, 30 years ago, as a parent, I was very angry that someone could do something like that to a child and then leave her there in the middle of nowhere." Jessica Ellis said she went to Waitman Middle School with Jennifer and played in the same clarinet section in band class. "I would say we saw each other a lot. We weren't like close friends, but we knew a lot of the same people. We rode the school bus every day, and I just remember her always being nice with me and everyone else that rode her school bus that knew her. You know, a lot of us are parents ourselves now, and the fact that anyone would do this to a child makes me hold my 5-year-old a lot tighter now." Grief and fear followed in the days, months, and years after Jennifer lost her life. The arrest of Crum is closure for many in the community. 17-year-old Gladys Ariano lived in Boyle Heights, Los Angeles, in 1996. She was beautiful, intelligent, and had big dreams for her life. Gladys was last seen on January 28, 1996, leaving her home. When she failed to return home later in the day, she was reported missing by her family. 2 days later, her body was found off a main road in a ravine in Topanga Canyon. She had been assaulted and strangled. Forensic evidence was collected from her body, and a DNA profile of the unknown offender was uploaded to state and federal DNA databases. However, a match could not be found. An extensive investigation was conducted by the investigators at the time, but it led nowhere, and the case went cold. That was until 2019 when Los Angeles police arrested a man by the name of Jose Luis Garcia for domestic assault. During the booking process, DNA swabs were taken from Garcia and processed. Investigators then realized that his DNA matched the DNA that was taken from Gladys's body in 1996. The crime took place when he was just 19 years old. They obtained a second DNA swab from him. The Los Angeles Crime Lab was then able to confirm that Garcia's genetic profile matched the unidentified sample taken from Gladys's body in 1996. 43-year-old Jose Luis Garcia was arrested by U.S. Marshals on September 29, 2019, in Dallas, Texas. He was extradited on October 14 to Los Angeles County, where he was held on a $1 million bail. Detective Hugo Rega said, "This case is typical of the type of cases that unsolved detectives are faced with on a daily basis. We are gratified that we were successful in bringing this tragic case to a close." Rega confirmed that investigators were looking into the possibility that Garcia was involved in other crimes as well. Gladys's niece and goddaughter, Samantha Moreno, spoke movingly of the need to remember her godmother, as well as all other women who were victims of violence. "Recognizing her life is important. Beautiful Latina souls from Boyle Heights should never be forgotten," Moreno said. "Acts of violence against women should never be forgotten." Samantha Moreno thanked the detectives who never lost sight of finding justice. Gladys Arellano's case was worked on by retired detectives Joe Purcell and Sean McCarthy, who both work part-time on the Sheriff's Department's Unsolved Case Unit. "Thank you for not giving up on our Gladys, who was a loving daughter, sister, aunt, and godmother. Gladys was only 17 when her life was taken. She had a beautiful soul. She was beautiful, intelligent, gorgeous, and she had a radiant smile. She had such big dreams for her life. My grandparents would have been so proud of her," Moreno said. She was grateful Garcia was off the streets after nearly a quarter century. "We want nothing more than for him to pay for his brutal crime," she said. "We recognize that this will not bring Gladys back, but we are relieved to know that there will be justice for Gladys. This is a victory that we acknowledge in her honor, and we look forward to more victories." Jose Luis Garcia was found guilty of all the charges against him on July 18, 2023. It was a day the loved ones of Gladys Arellano had been waiting decades for. "It is never enough for having taken the life of such a beautiful soul," said Elizabeth Arellano of her sister Gladys. Gladys Arellano's sister and best friend told the court that what Garcia did nearly destroyed them, as they wondered for more than 25 years what happened to her. "It was tough, but it felt really good to finally get it off your chest and actually see him and release it and have some kind of comfort," said Vanessa Arellano. Gladys Arellano's younger sister, Janet Ramirez, said the plea deal gives her some comfort, but it is not enough. 19 years is never enough, but I have comfort knowing now she can rest and that the perpetrator is going to be behind bars, because for 25 years, I've lived with the guilt of not knowing what I could have done differently, Ramirez said. Jose Garcia was sentenced on August 15, 2023, to 18 years and 8 months in prison for taking Gladys's life. Garcia pleaded no contest to voluntary manslaughter, kidnapping, and domestic assault, according to the district attorney's office. He waived his credit for the just over 1,000 days he has spent in jail since his 2020 arrest. Retired Sheriff's Detective Joe Purcell handled the cold case investigation. "The fact is that we can give justice to people and to society. It is really important not to let these cases go unresolved. We need to have people pay the debt they owe to society," he said. On August 9, 1980, high school sweethearts Tim Hack and Kelly Drew, both 19 years old at the time, went missing after attending a wedding reception at Concord House in Concord, Wisconsin. Over time, searchers found some clues as to where Tim and Kelly might have gone. Pants left behind by Tim in his car with wallet inside, ropes used by searchers in Concord, as well as undergarment containing women's underwear belonging to Kelly. These leads ultimately led 2 months later, when bodies of Tim and Kelly were found violated and left lying neglected among trees near Concord House.
At nearly 30 years later, advances in DNA technology, combined with an unlikely witness and an investigator's tenacious search for truth, led to the identification of the perpetrator, who had gone so unnoticed by even his neighbors that no one suspected anything sinister from him. So who was this man, and why did it take so long to locate them? Our story today takes us back to Concord, Wisconsin, a small town located within Jefferson County that boasts just over 2,000 people. Concord was an idyllic town, filled with parks and natural spaces, making it the ideal place for people who loved being outside. Activities such as hiking, biking, fishing, camping, and other outdoor pursuits were popular with residents. Concord boasted an incredibly low violent crime rate of just 7% during the 1980s when Tim Hack and Kelly Drew's story took place. That figure was significantly below the US average of 22.7% that decade. People didn't lock their doors, and neighbors looked out for each other, precisely the type of place where Tim Hack and Kelly Drew believed they could get married, settle on a farm, raise their children, while growing old together. Tim Hack and Kelly Drew were 19-year-old high school sweethearts engaged to be married. Tim resided with his family in Hine, a small town located within Jefferson County. Kelly resided with hers in Fort Atkinson. Tim first met Kelly while attending Fort Atkinson High School. They first met again while attending Fort Atkinson Middle School together, where Kelly excelled at cosmetology, while Tim excelled as a hard-working farmer. Both were highly admired among friends and family for their kind-hearted qualities, and Tim was revered among young people, aspiring to emulate them both as individuals or couples themselves. Tim started his professional life after graduation as a farmer. His best friend was his beloved tractor, known as the Lonesome Loser. Meanwhile, Kelly attended beauty school and graduated in 1980 in hopes of becoming a hairstylist or beautician. Tim and Kelly attended a wedding reception at Concord House in Wisconsin on August 9, 1980, with plans of meeting friends afterward to visit a carnival, but never turned up. At 11:00 p.m. on August 9, 1980, when they left the reception, Tim Hack was seen leaving by anyone alive. On August 10th, when no trace had been seen or heard from them since leaving reception, his father, David Hack, filed missing person reports for both of them and later found Tim's brown e-mobile in Concord House parking lot with $67 in his wallet locked inside, along with jacket and checkbook inside. There were speculations as to where exactly they had taken a bus ride to. On August 15th, searchers discovered Kelly's pants and underwear by the roadside about 3 miles from Concord House with male bodily fluids on them. Additionally, searchers discovered some ropes tied with various knots, suggesting military experience. Over the course of 10 days, multiple pieces of Kelly's clothing were found within a 6-mile radius from Concord House, as well as about a dozen rope pieces tied with various knots. This discovery marked an immediate transformation in the case. Suddenly, it wasn't just about finding two people who may have just decided to escape together for romantic getaway, but more about finding them alive because their lives could now be in imminent peril. 2 months later, some squirrel hunters from Milwaukee were hunting squirrels near Aonia, Wisconsin, about 7 miles from Concord House. As they traversed through wooded areas paralleling Highway 16 east of Watertown, they came upon Kelly Drew's badly decomposed remains near a railroad track paralleling it. She had been completely naked. As well as 100 yards later, found Tim Hack's fully clothed male body. Both had suffered fatal stabbing wounds on their bodies, as well as ligature marks suggesting deaths by stabbing and strangulation, respectively. It became known as sweetheart murders. Investigative interviews began by conducting in-depth interviews of everyone associated with the couple to ascertain any motive for harm against them. Police interviewed attendees of their wedding reception at Concord House, as well as staff. Edward Wayne. Edwards, who lived nearby but worked at Concord House as a handyman, was interrogated for clues as a possible suspect. Edward claimed not having seen them and wasn't even at Concord House around when they went missing. Instead, he claimed deer hunting in nearby woods, which raised suspicion as deer hunting season typically started around November. After questioning Edward in September 1980, his wife and 5 children left Wisconsin for good. investigators' most promising lead came from eyewitness accounts of a dirty-looking van parked next to Tim's car at Concord House parking lot that suddenly drove away suspiciously around the time Tim and Kelly were last seen alive. Edward owned Sucha van, which often housed his .357 revolver. However, without license plate numbers or strong evidence linking Edward to the crime scene, there were limited leads they could pursue further. As all leads for investigation were exhausted, the file was shelved and eventually forgotten about. 20 years after Tim Hack and Kelly Drew's murders had taken place, Richard Lewell from Wisconsin Department of Justice requested its reopening due to advances in DNA technology, which gave him hope there might finally be an answer. After digging through files, witness statements, and interview recordings for 2 months without success, one name stood out: Edward Wayne Edwards. Lewell and her cold case investigator team decided to pursue Edward as a potential suspect when interviewing his former neighbors from when he lived in Concord, Wisconsin. Interviewing Edward's neighbors revealed a difficult person who was short-tempered and volatile. John Edwards described his father as troubled. In 2009, April Baseo, Edward's daughter, contacted authorities with disturbing details regarding Tim Hack and Kelly Drew murders that could assist the investigation. Investigators quickly concluded the case. However, this information implicated Edward Wayne Edwards, her own father, who had served in the Marines for some time prior, who has an extensive criminal background. April was drawn into exploring her father's strange life due to her curiosity, wondering why their family had to move around so frequently. Later, as an adult, she came across a news article regarding the unsolved murders of Tim Hack and Kelly Drew from Concord, Wisconsin, around this same period, and remembered having moved from Concord shortly thereafter. This triggered more pieces of puzzle coming together and prompting April to reach out to authorities immediately. Edward Wayne Edwards was born in Akron, Ohio in 1933 and suffered at the hands of nun-run orphanages due to early parent loss. Abuse from nuns led to restless and rebellious teenagehood that manifested itself at 18 when released from juvenile detention on condition that he join the U.S. Marines, but just months after signing on, he mysteriously vanished and had to be dishonorably discharged from their ranks. Edward's life quickly took an illegal path with numerous run-ins with police for shoplifting and breaking and entering. By 1955, at 22, he had served time at a juvenile detention center before escaping in Akron, Ohio, and robbing gas stations along his journey across states before spending much of his 20s and 30s as a fugitive, working odd jobs, committing crimes, while enjoying notoriety from doing so. Edward refused to use any aliases when engaging in these criminal activities because he wanted his crimes to become known and famous. At 27 years old, Edward was placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list due to suspicion for 2 homicides in Portland, Oregon. Though no proof was ever produced to implicate him directly in these murders, Edward already had an extensive criminal history that included robbery, vehicle theft, fraud, and arson. Also possessing characteristics associated with serial killers, such as starting fires easily and exerting extreme control. Edward was arrested by authorities and jailed at the United States Penitentiary in Leavenworth until 1967, when he was paroled due to good behavior and credits his personal development to a kind guard during this period of incarceration. After his parole expired, Edward married and became a motivational speaker. By 1972, at 39, he appeared on TV shows such as To Tell the Truth and What's My Line. Edward wrote his autobiography entitled The Metamorphosis of a Criminal, the true life story of Ed Edwards, chronicling his criminal lifestyle while reveling in its notoriety. At 44 years old, Edward committed his first confirmed murders: 21-year-old Billy Larco and 18-year-old Judith Straub in Sterling, Ohio. They had gone out on a date together but never returned. Their bodies were later found with gunshot wounds, but investigators couldn't tie Edward to it at that time, and so he remained free. Edward continued his criminal activities after release, and by 1982, at age 49, was back behind bars in Pennsylvania on arson charges. Proud of his past accomplishments, in 1993, Edward sent letters to 19 states demanding criminal history records of individuals, including Tony Provenzano, Charles Manson, and Jimmy Hoffa, that had come across his path during their time in prison. Edward committed his third confirmed murder at age 63 when he killed Danny Boy Edwards, his foster son, who had recently returned home after serving in the U.S. Army, tricking him into nearby woods, shooting 2 bullets directly into his face before leaving him in a shallow grave that was eventually found by a hunter. Edward was a confirmed serial killer with an increasing body count who managed to avoid capture for years. People close to him, including his children, described him as troubled and abusive, leading them to distance themselves from him. Due to this behavior and criminal history, Edward became the prime suspect when DNA from Kelly's clothing matched Edward in 2009. Edward Wayne Edwards was found guilty in April 2010 for the 1980 murders of Tim Hack and Kelly Drew, receiving 2 concurrent life sentences. Although Edward initially requested the death penalty in Wisconsin, no such option existed at that time. Subsequently, in 2011, during a jailhouse interview, Edward confessed to another 2 murders from 1977, which took place. Billy Larco and Judith Straub's deaths had also occurred. However, these convictions received life sentences due to being unconstitutional in those years. Edward finally got his wish when he admitted killing Danny Boy Edwards, his foster son, in 2011. This act resulted in the death penalty being applied. While Edward was charged with 5 murders, investigators believe there could have been up to 15 victims or even more involved. Edward Wayne Edwards died from natural causes on April 7, 2011, at 77 years old at Columbus, Ohio Corrections Medical Center, marking an end to a deadly crime spree which had claimed 5 lives and broken numerous families apart. Although Edwards' arrest and conviction provided some closure, Kelly Walker's mother noted how it reopened old wounds, while Tim's father, David Hack, expressed relief and expressed thanks for DNA technology that identified Edward as her killer. April Baseo, Edward's daughter, who played an instrumental role in solving this cold case, now dedicates her time and efforts to providing other victims' families with closure through her podcast, The Clearing. Tim Hack and Kelly Drew had an optimistic future ahead of them that was tragically cut short when Edward Edwards killed them without provocation or personal malice. Rather, they were caught in Edward's crosshairs at an unfortunate time and place. Although Edward was ultimately arrested and sentenced, some believe he escaped full justice by dying of natural causes shortly before scheduled execution.
Cheryl Monique Taylor lived in Weldon, North Carolina in 2002. She had married John Osby from high school, and they had one daughter named Justice who was 7 years old at the time. On August 16, 2002, she woke up and realized Cheryl hadn't woken her in time for school bus stop, so Justice missed it and went back into Cheryl's bedroom, only to discover someone had taken Cheryl's life. Autopsy results revealed Justice had been strangled and likely assaulted, though details about any signs of forced entry or any possible evidence belonging to her perpetrator have never been made public. Although authorities conducted extensive investigations, no arrests were ever made, and the case went cold. Grieving partners John and Justice continued grieving together for 17 more years after her passing. John Osby went missing in December 2019 and was later found shot and covered with a blanket near Sycamore Street in Weldon. Investigators were unable to track down who shot him, leaving his family with unanswered questions as to his whereabouts and the fate of Cheryl Taylor and John Osby. Sheriff Tyree Davis made a change when, in January 2023, he hired Detective Sergeant Samoji as Halifax County's dedicated cold case investigator. Detective Samoji began by studying John Osby's case before realizing Cheryl's life had been taken by someone years earlier. On July 21, 2023, 46-year-old Lewis Turner Jr. of Northampton County in North Carolina was arrested and charged with the voluntary manslaughter of Cheryl Taylor. It remains unknown as of yet whether or not Turner is also responsible for shooting John Osby. It has, however, come to light that Turner was known to Cheryl and her family in 2002 when he killed Cheryl, age 25 at the time he committed this act. It also has 2 criminal assault charges from when he was younger that resulted in probation being issued against him after his arrest. After being charged, he was held at Halifax County Jail under a $250,000 bond until further notice to appear before court hearing. Scott Hall, patrol captain for the Halifax County Sheriff's Office, explained why voluntary manslaughter charges had been leveled against this incident. This was not premeditated or malicious killing based on facts of this case or elements of its crime, therefore we charged accordingly. Sheriff Tyree Davis expressed his emotions by sharing that arresting a suspect for Cheryl's case brought tears of joy. I received the call that we were able to close one of our cold cases dating back over 20 years. No one knew, and until we informed her family, we couldn't say anything. When I found out the news, I was immediately overcome by emotion and tears began streaming down my cheeks. As a member of the State Commission, I sat front row alongside other board members, trying my best to keep myself together by wiping away tears as they came. Once my sniffles began surfacing, though, I knew I needed to leave. Folks, I can assure you that these tears were tears of joy and excitement, not only for M. Taylor's family, but also her friends, co-workers, schoolmates, and anyone she has crossed paths with before. Additionally, this beacon of hope serves as a beacon for other families that require closure as well. Justice Osby, Cheryl's daughter, expressed her sentiments upon hearing of Turner's arrest by saying it was an amazing feeling and she never expected it. Justice extended her gratitude to those involved with helping bring Turner to justice by saying, "Today is such a good day, thank you all." Wendy OGG was born February 15, 1958. While much is not known about Wendy's early life, what is certain is that by 1978, she was living in Bellingham with her daughter Charlena as a 29-year-old single mother and attending McDonald's beauty school to further her own education for an improved future for herself and Charlena. Whatever Wendy's motivation for learning may have been, one thing is clear. She was clearly an amazing individual with immense determination and resilience. On April 24, 1987, Wendy found herself taking a break from beauty school to visit La Paloma restaurant across the street for lunch. With spring just around the corner and hopes of relaxation high in Bellingham, Wendy likely relished this chance to stop studying for a moment and relax while having lunch with family and friends. Wendy returned from lunch with some exciting news for her classmates at beauty school. She told of a chance meeting she had at La Paloma restaurant with Mike Johnson, whom she immediately liked due to his distinguished three-piece suit and charming personality. Wendy revealed she planned on going out on a date with Mike later that afternoon. As the sun began to set that evening, Wendy left her daughter in the care of a trusted babysitter and set out on her journey towards Mike for their first date. With anticipation and excitement consuming her thoughts, It wasn't long until Mike and Wendy found themselves growing more comfortable with one another as the evening progressed, eventually ending up at one of Wendy's friends' homes, where they chatted until early hours of morning before calling it quits and heading off into darkness together. No one could have predicted it would be the last time anyone would see Wendy alive. Wendy had failed to come home as planned and collect her daughter, leading the babysitter of Wendy's daughter to become anxious and ultimately fearful that something was amiss. They eventually reported her missing to police and sought assistance in finding Wendy. The police acted swiftly, arriving at Wendy's house quickly in hopes of discovering evidence or leads that might help locate her. Once inside, they began their search of the house. When they reached her bedroom, they found something unsettling. 2 pools of dried blood at the head of Wendy's bed, with its sheets saturated in bloodstains from 2 pools at its head, as well as another unidentifiable stain on its sheet soaked with blood that shocked them. It became evident that something violent had taken place within this home, and the mystery behind her disappearance had taken a dark turn. Detectives were immediately put into action upon discovering the horrific scene in Wendy's bedroom, interviewing her friends to gain any information they could gather, including interviewing Mike, her recent date who vanished with stolen cash and liquor from La Paloma restaurant where they worked bartending for 2 days before going missing with stolen funds and liquor from La Paloma's liquor cabinet, driving off in Wendy's 1972 Ford Torino vehicle, making his disappearance even more perplexing for investigators. They knew they must find Mike as soon as possible, or else risk further investigation would further delays could ensue in finding their target's whereabouts as soon as possible. Mike had quickly disappeared from Bellingham, and they quickly discovered a promising lead. They learned of an individual entering the United States from Canada in Wendy's car the day after Mike vanished. United States Customs authorities even snapped a photo and collected information on him. Hours after this photo was taken, Wendy's vehicle was found abandoned near Eugene, Oregon. Authorities conducted a search of the vehicle and made an unexpected find: bloodied men's pants. Additionally, they discovered a Burger King hamburger box where they were able to lift fingerprints belonging to one Darren D. O'Neill, who had an extensive criminal background that included robbery and assault offenses. After further analysis revealed this result, detectives quickly realized Mike may be an alias used by O'Neill himself. To verify their suspicions, they obtained the job application Mike had submitted to La Paloma restaurant and ran it through fingerprint matching software. Their hunch was proven right when O'Neill's fingerprints matched those on Mike, leaving no doubt as to his identity as being who had gone by Mike since being seen last with Wendy. Authorities were determined to locate O'Neill, but he seemed to vanish without trace. Additionally, his identity and appearance often changed frequently, making tracking him nearly impossible. Finally, in September 1987, detectives finally had success when O'Neill was apprehended in Florida on an outstanding stolen car warrant and then extradited back to Washington State, where charges for his heinous crimes would be filed against him. O'Neill faced several charges related to Robin Smith, 21, from Pierce County in Washington State, who had gone missing just 4 weeks prior to Wendy. Her body was discovered in May 1987. When asked by police about Wendy, O'Neill refused to reveal any information, and instead refused any information regarding Robin's whereabouts or whereabouts. 2 years later, in 1989, he pleaded guilty and received life imprisonment, while also being found guilty for second-degree auto theft for having stolen her vehicle, thus providing some level of closure for Wendy's family and friends. O'Neill's crimes became public knowledge once again in August 1990 as another victim's story emerged. O'Neill was charged with kidnapping and perpetrating unspeakable atrocities upon a 14-year-old Portland girl back in 1987. Following swift and decisive jury deliberation, he was handed 135 years imprisonment as punishment in this particular case alone. O'Neill's imprisonment certainly brought some measure of justice. However, his silence surrounding Wendy's disappearance was deafening. No one knew if she was still alive or where her body could be located. Efforts by authorities, Wendy's family and friends, as well as Wendy herself, failed to shed any light into what had transpired with her disappearance. Instead, it seemed as if she had seemingly vanished without trace, leaving only speculation by community members regarding what may have transpired with her fateful journey. As time passed, hope of finding Wendy alive began fading, and only search for her body was left. Bellingham Police Department had given up hope of solving Wendy's disappearance until in 2015, they received a startling report from Washington State Patrol Crime Laboratory about evidence found at her home that could potentially open the case wide open. Detectives had noticed a suspicious stain on Wendy's bedsheet years before, but only now was its identity confirmed as semen stain. DNA extracted from the stain was used to create a profile, and results were final. O'Neill had already been serving a life sentence for various crimes, and now justice might finally be done for Wendy after all these years. In November 2020, the Washington State Patrol Crime Laboratory informed detectives about an important development relating to Wendy O'Neill's car after it had been abandoned by O'Neill, specifically that blood from one pair of pants found there belonged to Wendy herself. As more pieces fell into place, it became evident that O'Neill was responsible for Wendy's disappearance and likely death. Finally, in October 2022, authorities moved against him, charging him with second-degree murder of Wendy with an astonishing $10 million bail set amount. On March 1, 2023, O'Neill was extradited from Oregon, where he had been serving a 135-year prison term, and on March 10th, he appeared before Whatcom County Superior Court, where despite overwhelming evidence against him, he pled not guilty, leaving the courtroom stunned in silence. O'Neill's public defense attorney Stark Follis argued that due to its long gap since Ogg's murder, and charges being laid upon O'Neill should also be considered. Additionally, Follis asked why O'Neill wasn't charged back then for stealing her car instead. At present, O'Neill's next scheduled appearance is set for April 5, 2023, leaving many to speculate as to its outcome. But these 5 cases demonstrate how justice may take its time, but never forgets. Thanks to law enforcement efforts and advancements in forensic technology that enabled investigators to solve cases once thought unsolvable. Families of victims now can rest easy, knowing their loved ones haven't been forgotten. At 4:45 p.m. on January 24, 1991 in East Harlem, New York, 13-year-old Pa Allah returned home after attending school and entered her apartment building's elevator, headed toward her 30-floor unit, yet somehow mysteriously vanished during that short journey. 3 hours later, at around 7:30 p.m., when sunset approached on that tragic day, a passerby discovered Pa's lifeless body half a mile away, prompting questions regarding who might have been behind her disappearance and death in her community. Why did she vanish, and why did her body not appear at home? Pa and her family resided in East Harlem, also known as El Barrio, situated at the heart of Manhattan in New York City. Renowned for its eclectic blend of traditions, art, and community spirit, East Harlem boasts an eclectic population with strong Hispanic Latino roots that is evident by lively festivals, eateries, and colorful murals that adorn its streets. Also home to Museum of the City of New York, which highlights New York history. Statistically, your chances of crime being committed are roughly 1 out of 22, which is where our story began. Pa Allah was born in Colombia to Cesar and Olga Alera. She had 2 older siblings named Julio and Alexander. In June 1990, Pa moved with her mother and siblings to East Harlem in New York City in search of better opportunities. They resided on the 30th floor of an apartment building at 420 East 111 Street. Pa stayed with Uncle Guo Opina. Her father, Cesar, continued working as a taxi driver in Colombia while saving money to join his family in New York one day. As soon as they arrived in New York, Pa started attending Junior High School 99 and excelling academically, according to her sister Alexandra. Her Uncle Guo described Pa as highly intelligent and mature for her age. With many plans in the future, she had many friends but few confidants compared with those at school where she resided, with only a handful of classmates as friends. her goal being becoming a lawyer. According to Alexandra, she thrived academically as her focus lay in English and mathematics studies during free time. Her mother described her as highly intelligent, as well as enjoying time spent learning these subjects outside her class, with classmates as peers. She only had few classmates as close friends, due to studying English and mathematics during free periods at school where she attended. Her uncle Guo described Pa as highly intelligent for her age, while thinking beyond her years, something her uncle Guo noted because Pa delighted in New York, thanks to her love of English. He noted as well as being happy because of loving the English language itself, according to him. Uncle Guo went on describing Pa as highly intelligent with plans of her own, while saying something along these lines when speaking. Of course being told the words spoken, of course being read aloud about plans of future plans. When asked by him in class on being told by him as told her Uncle Guo, that Pa said something similar on an earlier time, saying it seemed that made him extremely impressed upon hearing, of course had not occurred when learning more of course than ever would. At first, everything seemed to be going as expected for Pa and her family until an unfortunate event changed their lives forever. On January 24, 1991, 13-year-old Pa left school early and made her way home through familiar streets towards her apartment building, arriving around 4:45 p.m. via intercom call to her mother Olga, who answered and let her in by pressing the button that unlocked the lobby door. However, this would be Olga's final interaction with Pa before passing away in 1993. Paula entered the lobby and boarded an elevator, only to never arrive at their 30th floor apartment. When Pa hadn't come home after 10 minutes had passed, her brother and uncle became concerned. Something wasn't right, so they went searching for her. Upon arrival at the lobby, they found it completely vacant, searching desperately through their neighborhood, but no sign of Pa could be found anywhere. 3 hours later, at approximately 7:30 p.m., while out walking his dog, he made a shocking discovery. He saw a lifeless figure lying near the East River, with items related to drugs strewn about such as vials, syringes, and lighters scattered nearby. This tragic discovery turned out to be Pa's slender body lying there after she had died, half a mile south from where she resided, in an apartment building nearby. Detectives were met with a deeply saddening sight at Pa's scene. She had sustained a single stab wound in her center chest area, and further examination revealed a ligature wrapped around her neck with minimal blood pouring out from it. No evidence indicated who committed this act. All they found on Pa was a New Kids on the Block watch on her wrist and some chalk in her pocket. Pa's murder had an enormous impact, not only on her immediate family, but also the surrounding neighborhood. Her mother, Olga, struggled to accept the loss of her daughter. At her school, both students and teachers were devastated. Teachers held meetings with affected classmates in order to provide support in helping them cope with grief. In addition, all pupils were advised against walking alone around that area for safety concerns. As a response to this incident, reporters were not permitted access to the school, and principal and district officials declined to speak with them. Detectives were left with numerous unanswered questions. They went door to door in the 32-floor building, looking for witnesses who may have seen Pa in the area where her body would eventually be discovered. Unfortunately, they could not locate any. Furthermore, there was no indication as to who may have committed this tragedy, leaving it unknown whether Pei's body had been murdered at this spot filled with crack vials or elsewhere. Detectives were able to unearth several crucial details during their investigation. They learned that Pei would often stay after school hours for journalism workshops on Wednesdays and Thursdays. On the day she was killed, she was working on an article for him as a Valentine's Day gift. Furthermore, they determined that after leaving school around 4 p.m. after her workshop on First Avenue with another friend at around 4 UR, both eventually dispersing at 106th Street, with Pia deciding she wanted to continue on to her family apartment building alone. Detectives learned through their investigations that another teenager named Aaron Wofford had entered the same elevator with Pa, yet claimed to have exited at only 19th floor, while Pa continued ascending the tower. As a result, detectives changed their focus away from him as a suspect. An autopsy showed the full extent of Pa's ordeal. She had been violated, strangled, and stabbed 3 times near her heart, in addition to this mark being observed by medical examiner. Pa had shown great courage in resisting an assault, with her attacker using force to separate her legs, leaving bruises that mirrored their fingers on both thighs. Additionally, an examiner collected male hair from Pa's body. This evidence would be stored. On February the 2nd, 1991, Paola Pa was laid to rest at St. Michael's Cemetery in East Elmhurst, Queens, 4 months after her tragic murder. Victim Services was there for them when they relocated to Flushing, New York. Olga found solace through counseling at Families of Homicide Victims program, operated by Victim Services. She and the rest of her family also held on to hope that Pa's case might yet bring justice. But as time progressed and justice seemed further away than ever, their journey for answers became more challenging than ever. Murder of a 13-year-old girl should have been an explosive news story anywhere and at any time. Yet in New York of 1991, it largely went unnoticed. Between 1990 and 1992, New York City reported over 2,000 murders annually, with 6 bodies found daily across its 5 boroughs. Most occurred in impoverished, predominantly minority neighborhoods such as East Harlem, the South Bronx, or East New York and Brooklyn. Unfortunately, very few cases like these received significant media coverage. Instead, more upscale crimes involving white victims or wealthy victims located elsewhere than East Harlem or East New York, Brooklyn. Without media or political pressure, Pa's case quickly became low priority, and her murder remained unresolved and forgotten for much of the 1990s. By mid-1999, crime rates in New York City had decreased, but East Harlem housing projects saw an alarming trend develop involving several seemingly unrelated assaults and killings of young, attractive teenagers, with large-scale DNA evidence connecting Iran to 6 out of 7 cases. John Earn and Richard Plansky presented an impressive case against Iran during his fall 2000 trial, offering testimony and DNA evidence against him. Prosecution witnesses included 2 victims, as well as 13 prosecution witnesses overall, with Iran himself taking the stand first as his defense witness and then testifying over 2 days. During these sessions, he displayed emotions ranging from giggling like a schoolgirl to crying like an infant. Furthermore, he expressed his disdain at being prosecuted as well as anger towards being tried. His monologue, mostly uninterrupted by judge or attorneys, or his own attorneys alike, covered topics including pop culture, drugs, rap music, jail food issues, as well as reflections upon criminal justice systems. Iran presented an elaborate defense before his trial began in 2000 for his violent serial violence against young women. He maintained that police conspired against him as part of an elaborate cover-up scheme, orchestrated by an organ-harvesting medical examiner he suspected was involved with harvesting and selling human organs, even asserting that his DNA had been altered through what he termed genetic shuffling. However, when the jury rendered its guilty verdict on December 16, 2000, they burst out into cheers and relief. As Iran was led past a crowd of grieving relatives, he directed an impolite curse at them. At his sentencing a month later in January 2001, family members of Iran's victims had the opportunity to address him directly. Olga Pa's mother addressed Iran directly and conveyed to him her wish that he understood their torment. Sleepless nights, loss of appetite, inability to walk or breathe properly, lack of peace, all while thinking of her daughter's suffering at her death. She expressed her pain at having brought her daughter here from Russia as they pursued American dreams together with her daughter Olga, spoke directly about her daughter, having brought her daughter here from Russia, as she spoke of her pain due to her having brought her daughter here from Russia, as she talked about her family. Iran wept openly as he spoke at his sentencing hearing, offering his apology and saying that he felt responsible. At that moment, Joas Castro's male cousin became infuriated and attempted to leap over the barrier so as to attack Iran directly. Justice Joan Sedan then rendered her verdict. She issued 3 life sentences without parole for each murder, as well as 4 400-year sentences for 4 counts of abuse against Iran, who was then sentenced at Clinton Correctional Facility, located in Dannemora, New York. Before Iran's sentencing, lawmakers in New York and many other states had passed laws mandating DNA testing for individuals arrested in relation to violent crimes. Since then, DNA testing has expanded to cover most felony arrests, spanning both violent and nonviolent offenses, and even some jurisdictions have instituted testing of individuals arrested on misdemeanor charges. Olga's anguish over Pa's sudden and senseless death remains fresh. She understands well the trauma caused by such sudden loss doesn't fade with time, especially if there are unanswered questions. We journey along Pa's heartbreaking tale as Iran commits crimes such as these heinous ones against society, leaving us to ask what drives such behavior and how can society identify and address such triggers. Laura Kempton was 23 years old in 1981 when she lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. She attended Portsmouth Beauty School while also working at Macro Polo Gift Store and Karen's Ice Cream Parlor. Laura was known as an outgoing free spirit with an outsized personality who enjoyed socializing. Laura was last seen entering her Chapel Street apartment alone during the early morning hours of September 28, 1981. A police officer serving a court summons for unpaid parking tickets found Laura's body hours later, upon making his way up to her residence and discovering a wooden panel piece had come loose from its hinge, creating an opening through which he could see Laura lying dead just inside her apartment. Autopsies showed that she died shortly after entering her apartment, suffering massive trauma to the left side of her head, including skull fractures, lacerations, and contusions on her brain. Additionally, she had been assaulted, which allowed DNA evidence collection from her body as well as evidence from the crime scene itself. Investigators collected other evidentiary items at this location. Interviews of other residents at Laura's apartment complex yielded no useful information, and the case ultimately fizzled out. In 1986, investigators revealed they had interrogated Ronald Spock about Laura's death after learning he had also killed 2 other women in Boston, Massachusetts. Spock denied any involvement. Portsmouth police, however, were monitoring his case closely and reviewing any criminal allegations made against him. Only Ronald Spiewak being from nearby NH gave a strong nudge in that direction. But this alone wasn't a strong link either. Spock had met his victims, Gina Quare and Kathleen McGuire, on 2 separate occasions in Boston and admitted later to ending their lives, though at first he claimed each time was self-defense-based. Spock strangled both women before disposing of them in various locations, Gina in an abandoned railway car near South Boston, and Kathleen near an information booth on Interstate 95 near Kittery, Maine. No real links between Laura's case and that of Dina Kittler were ever discovered, but 2 Portsmouth detectives attending a conference in Florida at that time listened intently as an investigator from the Naval Investigative Service described its investigation into Dina Kittler. Dina was assaulted and strangled with rope at her Mayport, Florida home in December 1990, with signs of intense struggle being visible throughout her home, as well as numerous hair clumps which had been cut off in the bathtub. Her naval officer husband had been deployed at the time of Dina's death. Portsmouth Police, Captain James Tucker could hardly believe what he heard. Dina's case bore a striking resemblance to Michelle Leon's murder in New Hampshire, and authorities had already arrested someone named John Brewer as being involved with Dina's case. John Brewer had been released shortly after his arrest due to insufficient physical evidence. However, as more details emerged concerning Michelle Leon's case in Dublin, New Hampshire, Brewer was brought back into custody and held without charge. Soon, Portsmouth investigators were able to establish a link between Brewer and Michelle Leon. James Tucker found in records an application John Brewer had filled out listing Gary Leon as his reference. This led directly back to Michelle herself. Police identified John Brewer as being involved in both cases based on DNA evidence taken from hairs collected during the Kittler case and DNA sample collected for Leon case. Based on this discovery, Brewer was charged and brought before court for both. News of Brewer's indictment spread quickly across the Granite State, prompting reports that she had links to 3 additional cases, 2 in Portsmouth and 1 in Florida. At the time of Laura Kempton's murder, Brewer was living in New Hampshire. but his actions seemed distinct from those of New Hampshire natives. Unfortunately, no correlations could ever be drawn. Perhaps this was just an inference based on his arrest being performed by detectives from Portsmouth. Rumors in Portsmouth of what happened to Laura swirled about two young men known as drug suppliers. These individuals had appeared on police logs with various offenses before becoming more violent in nature. Thomas Faraghi led one such operation that escalated to far more brazen criminal activity. Faraghi had been arrested several times for assaulting women before being indicted in March 1982 for fatally shooting 24-year-old Valerie Blair of Rye at Odiorn State Park after she had been hit with 5 shots fired from a .22 caliber pistol. She had found her in Odiorn State Park with 5 bullet wounds to her head and face from Faraghi's operation. Thomas Faraghi remained in prison for years while maintaining his innocence of Valerie Blair's murder, attributing it to one of his associates whom he believes must have stolen his gun. Later in an interview, Faraghi suggested the same man may have killed Laura Kempton too. Faraghi claimed she was one of their customers, and one of their employees became upset after seeing Laura kiss someone while they were conducting business at her apartment, while they were there conducting transactions. In 1982, his girlfriend attended Portsmouth Beauty School together with Laura Kempton. Faraghi's DNA was collected, but never charged further than this incident. Instead, police looked into and cleared one suspect from Faraghi's accusations in both cases before moving on with their cases until far later cases against them was cleared as being responsible. On July 20, 2023, investigators finally released an important update. Laura's case had finally been solved after 42 years. Officials identified Ronnie James Lee as her perp. He resided and worked in Portsmouth. Rachel Harrington, Assistant Attorney General, stated there is no indication Lee knew Laura Kempton personally. Lee served in the U.S. Army from May 15, 1981 until May 15, 1982, before taking up employment at MBI Security at Liberty Mutual of Portsmouth from June 1981 through August 1982. Lee provided his mother's address on Rock Hill Avenue in Portsmouth when arrested by Portsmouth police for attempted theft on November 8, 1982. Lee was arrested and pleaded guilty to 4 residential and 1 commercial burglaries during 1983. 2 of these burglaries he pled guilty to in 1987. Additionally, Lee was convicted on assault charges stemming from a burglary committed in Keene, New Hampshire, that included assaulting a female resident in her own home during this incident. Lee was sentenced to prison from December 1987 until July 1990 and ultimately passed away after overdosing on February 9, 2005, at age 45. Attorney General officials stated that were Lee still alive, he would face first-degree charges of endangering Laura during an attempt at aggravated felonious assault and striking her with an object believed to be a wine bottle. Investigators used genetic genealogy techniques to identify Lee. Physical evidence at the scene in 1981 yielded male DNA profiles. Officials stated that starting in 2022, Portsmouth police have collaborated with the New Hampshire State Police Forensic Laboratory, Maine State Police, Forensic Laboratory, Attorney General's Cold Case Unit and Genetic Genealogy Research Organization, Identifiers International, collaborated in conducting forensic genetic genealogy to identify Lee as the donor of DNA found at the crime scene. Since he no longer lives, this case can now be considered closed and solved. Laura's family issued the following statement upon hearing of its resolution. We wish to extend our sincerest appreciation and thanks for solving Laura's case through Portsmouth Police Department. Their dedication and hard work, along with decades of personal commitment, has brought Laura to this point in time. Family would like to extend a sincere thank you to retired Captain John Parash and the Portsmouth Police Department Investigative Division team, members past and present, for all their hard work on Laura's case, which led to this important moment today. Their tireless dedication made this momentous event possible. Over the last 41 years, numerous other hands have touched Laura's file, and we express our profound thanks for all your contributions. At this time, however, the Kempton family requests privacy as we process this information. Thank you to all. Law enforcement officials have stated in the past that Laura's case and Tammy Little's death in Portsmouth in 1982 could possibly be linked. When asked by reporters about Tammy, Attorney General John Formella responded that it is still under investigation, while for Little he stated, "Our hope is that what we announce today may provide additional insight into that investigation." Tammy Little had not been heard from since Sunday evening, after friends dropped her off from a night out at Portsmouth Beauty School. Friends had seen her arriving home after the event, after an overnight party on Saturday evening, and dropping her off in her Maplewood Avenue apartment, after spending Saturday night out together. No one knew why Tammy would remain unreachable for so long. When something appeared wrong, it became evident. Tammy's mother decided to check in on her daughter at Maplewood Avenue apartment and discovered an unspeakably traumatizing sight. Her lifeless body in their apartment, where they had been severely beaten on by someone. Authorities quickly responded when Tammy's mother called them about the case at 315 Maplewood Avenue. Investigators collected physical evidence from within her home, as well as interviewing nearby neighbors before conducting an autopsy the following day, which revealed she had died of massive head injuries caused by being viciously struck on the head with something. As Tammy's family and friends mourned her tragic death, many residents in her city found themselves living under an aura of unease. Many residents' worst fears had seemingly come true, and an air of uncertainty filled the neighborhood. Again it had happened. Another girl, another crime, and no arrests made. Laura and Tammy share much more in common than just how their lives ended. Tammy and Laura lived alone in ground-level apartments in Portsmouth and attended the Portsmouth Beauty School. Both women attended modeling agencies to try to secure work. Both women were outgoing, frequented some of the same bars downtown, and tragically both died on an autumn weekend day, only 1 mile apart from one another. DNA will soon provide answers as to whether Ronnie James Lee also played a part in taking Tammy Little's life. Jeremiah Watkins was born August 22 in Morgantown, Monongalia County, to James Edward Watkins and Enid Nicola, who were filled with pride at bringing into this world their precious bundle. Tragically, however, tragedy struck just 4 years later, with James Edward Watkins dying, leaving Enid to raise Jeremiah alone despite her grief. Nevertheless, she remained strong and loving toward him, providing all he needed as she raised their son with all their love and care she could. After their divorce, Enid was living in Terra Alta with Jeremiah and her infant daughter Jamie, only just months old at that point. But there is no evidence she remarried. Jeremiah had always found immense pleasure in doting on his baby sister, spending hours playing and making her laugh. Additionally, there was one other thing which brought him great pleasure: his beloved Kit Kat. After every tasty, crunchy bite of that sweet and salty goodness, Jeremiah felt like the happiest boy alive. To work off some calories after feasting his eyes upon its delicious sweetness, he'd explore every inch of West Virginia with his bicycle. His adventurous spirit would often lead him down different routes in West Virginia's rolling hills and valleys, just what his life needed: family love and natural splendor. However, as they hoped for it, things took an unexpected and tragic turn. One day when Jeremiah went for his usual playdate, but never returned home, something that happened sometime during early November 1985, when West Virginia was hit with a powerful rainstorm that caused severe flooding, which destroyed roads and bridges, leaving authorities scrambling to assist those affected, while also taking over 40 lives. Shocking. Authorities started looking for Jeremiah as soon as the floodwater receded, yet their efforts were hindered by floodwater, and Jeremiah was missing for days. On November 12, 1985, deputies discovered a shallow grave near train tracks near Terra Alta, about 30 miles from Morgantown, containing his lifeless body. Their hearts broke at this news. Initial investigations led the officers to believe the flooding had claimed another victim, but upon closer examination, they made a shocking discovery. There was a stab wound on the boy's back that revealed a violent end. Desperate to discover any leads, officers searched around, but the torrential rains and flooding had washed away any potential evidence, leaving only questions and heartbreaking tragedy as answers. Enid was left in pieces when she learned of Jeremiah's death, as she could not comprehend such a senseless and tragic event happened to her son. The pain of losing him was immense, and Enid struggled with accepting that her child may never see another day. An autopsy conducted later revealed that in addition to suffering a fatal stab wound, leading directly to his demise, Jeremiah also experienced a devastating blow to the head, which resulted in a fatal brain bleed causing his death. Due to this news, detectives launched an intensive investigation to bring justice. After interviewing many witnesses and following every lead possible, none of their efforts proved fruitful as no suspect was ever identified or arrests made, leaving the case open and unsolved for years. Jaime couldn't help but reflect upon her brother she'd barely known, whom she only vaguely remembered. "I have some memory of him, but how much do you remember at first glance?" When Jaime learned the truth behind how her brother had died, it left her devastated and full of unanswered questions. Who had done this, and why had it happened to him? It haunted her daily thoughts for days after. Jaime struggled with the unsolved murder of her brother Jeremiah after becoming an adult. While attending college in the early 2000s, she took action by reaching out to authorities seeking information. Unfortunately, however, their response was disheartening, as the investigation had long since gone cold. Any possibility of finding the culprit being minimal at best. Captain T.N. Ticknell of the Preston County Sheriff's Office took on the decades-old unsolved murder case of Jeremiah in February 2023 with great enthusiasm, out of compassion for Jeremiah's family being denied justice for so long, to uncover any overlooked clues that could lead to an investigation breakthrough. After hours spent poring over interviews and witness statements, he came upon David Monroe Adams, aged 18 at time of murder and living in Terra Alta. This caught his attention. Captain Ticknell noted some discrepancies in Adams's statement and decided to find and interview him again, although those discrepancies remain undisclosed. Captain Ticknell's dedication to solving Jeremiah's case led him to track down Adams that same February. With the assistance of other law enforcement agencies, he conducted several interviews with him. One interview led Adams confessing to killing Jeremiah. The pieces finally fitted together. Adams had apparently engaged Jeremiah in an argument over a stolen bicycle, which quickly escalated to violence. Adams subsequently attacked Jeremiah with a blow to the face before taking him to a nearby shed, where he fatally stabbed him before tossing his lifeless body into a shallow hole that eventually led to its discovery. Detectives were overjoyed at Adams' confession to them. They finally felt as if the unsolved case that had haunted their community for nearly 4 decades had finally come to a conclusion. Adams was immediately arrested and charged with second-degree murder before being taken to North Central Regional Jail, where he remains held today. Enid was informed by a deputy that her son's murderer had been captured. Enid immediately reached out to Jaime to share this news. Jaime was stunned and in disbelief at being given such good news. Though questions still linger regarding Jaime's brother's demise, everyone remains hopeful for justice to finally prevail. Back in 2011, Hyannis, Massachusetts's charming seaside town, was alive with an infectious energy. Gretchen Eleanor Harrington was born June 13, 1967, in Marple Township, Pennsylvania, to Harold Boyd Harrington and Ina Cover Harrington. Gretchen had 3 sisters named Zoe, Anne, and Jessica that helped mold her personality while creating memories that are dearly held onto by Gretchen today. Harold Harrington was a pastor with various congregations of the Reformed Presbyterian Church of North America. On August 15, 1975, 8-year-old Gretchen Harrington left her home on 27 Lawrence Road in Broomall, with her Bible in one hand for Trinity Church Chapel at 140 Lawrence Road, where her father served as pastor, while David Zanstra was pastor at another. Gretchen was looking forward to attending Bible school camp. Gretchen had always made her journey with Zoe and Harriet, her older sisters. However, on this particular day, her mother, Ina, was bringing home Jessica, while Zoe and Harriet preferred staying home to wait. Pastor Harrington encouraged Gretchen to attend Bible school to maintain her perfect attendance record. Therefore, she walked alone uphill toward church soon after 9 a.m. Her father waved goodbye as she started uphill toward church just after 9 a.m. Marple was an idyllic, leafy suburb where children enjoyed playing various outdoor games until all hours, roaming its streets at night, exploring its woods, cooling off in Darby Creek that ran behind Gretchen's home, and walking alone to their friends' homes miles away, not knowing they might get into any danger if left alone for more than an hour or two at a time. Walking alone on sunny summer days wasn't seen as risky or unusual. Marple was as safe as could be. At 9 to 9:30 a.m., children began arriving at camp, and one of the first activities on their agenda was an exercise session led by David Zonster, another pastor at Reformed Presbyterian Church, before half of them were transported over there for the remainder of their day. Zonstra was among those responsible for transporting these youngsters to Reformed Presbyterian Church for continued learning activities. At 10:30 a.m., Harold was concerned when Gretchen hadn't yet arrived at the second church, where he was waiting. Harold began searching Lawrence Road to see if she'd wandered off or gone home. When this didn't help, Harold called Margaret Zanstra at Trinity Chapel to inquire whether Gretchen was still there and whether David Zanstra had transported her somewhere else. Margaret informed Harold that her husband had returned after transporting children, but hadn't seen Gretchen during that day. Margaret informed Harold that her husband had returned after transporting children, but hadn't seen Gretchen at Trinity Chapel that day either. Margaret Zanstra had returned after transporting children from Trinity Chapel, after transporting children, but had not seen Gretchen, while Margaret told Harold her husband had returned after transporting children, but hadn't seen Gretchen that day either. Margaret reported back that David Zanstra had returned after transporting children, but hadn't seen Gretchen while being near Trinity Chapel, but hadn't seen Gretchen either. Margaret informed Harold that Zanstra had returned after transporting children, but hadn't seen Gretchen that day. Margaret reported back that David Zanstra had returned after transporting children and was somewhere around Trinity Chapel, while being somewhere around Trinity Chapel property, but hadn't seen Gretchen that day. Margaret reported back that David Zanstra somewhere around somewhere within its property, but hadn't seen Gretchen yet, nor seen her anywhere on Trinity property, but hadn't seen Gretchen that day. Margaret told Harold she hadn't seen Gretchen that day. Margaret told Harold of such being where David Zanstra, Haddon's wife Margaret, had returned after transporting children. Although David Zanstra hadn't not seen Gretchen on that, he and his husband had not seen Gret before. After transporting children, only hers property, however, but Haddon's husband wasn't presence there on their property. Margaret told him he Haddon's husband had seen Greta's presence, but hadn't heaven but hadn't sight. Margaret that her husband wasn't seen her or know who's seeing any sign. Margaret herself having seen Gret saw nothing. Margaret that their husband, wherever seen before so far away anywhere. He hadn't seen her seen anything, and she hadn't absence, but hadn't anywhere but hadn't either. Had seen. Had yet seen or not seen Gret seen nor seen either. Had not seen Gret scenes, had returned after transporting children somewhere close, but hadn't having being around somewhere. But had seen neither had seen or known. And so, but so had seen. But had not seen Gray before either. Unfortunately either. Had seen Gret. But had seen anywhere. Had seen anywhere on church property but hadn't. And had seen any, but had seen Gret. It's where David Zanstra around, he hadn't her since. Or seen or known wherever seen anyone. But had seen, but before him either. But had seen any, or any he would, either he hadn't either. Had seen no one either. But so, but still hadn't, but maybe seen. Hadn't saw he had found Gret, thought, or not. The Harringtons and Zanstras knew each other intimately. Both families lived close by one another, and their fathers shared similar professions as pastors. One of Zanstra's daughters became Gretchen's closest companion. David Zanstra was told by Harold Harrington to report Gretchen missing at 11:23 a.m. He provided the police with a description of Gretchen as an 8-year-old with blonde pigtails, who stood 3 feet 6 inches and weighed 50 pounds. wearing dark blue shorts with zipper and snap front pockets on each side, and wearing white top. Quite impressive for someone who didn't actually witness Gretchen during that day. As the sun set just before 8 p.m. that evening, no sign of Gretchen could be found. Margaret Zanstra brought dinner to Ina Harrington's home, where Ina seemed resigned to never seeing her daughter alive again. Margaret commented, "She seemed kind of accepting it, Gretchen's death, without trying too hard. Perhaps just trying not to show it. Perhaps in shock. Something was going through her mind." Gretchen's disappearance sent shockwaves through Broomall and Marple Township, sending people into panic mode. By Saturday afternoon, hundreds of people had joined in the search effort. From Pennsylvania State Police helicopter flights, overhead, to family members handing out flyers featuring Gretchen with her most recent school picture, featuring missing teeth and an innocent smile displayed prominently on each flyer. There were numerous questions and unanswered speculations, like, had she run away, drown in a creek, be abducted by strangers, or have an acquaintance come after her? People and church members who searched for 8-year-old Gretchen felt her disappearance had shaken the faith that their community was safe. Karen Frank Zetterberg was Gretchen's Bible school classmate. As soon as her sister went missing, Karen's mom took her to a hairdresser so her hair would appear shorter to make her less conspicuous in public, also no longer allowed walking alone to piano lessons and the swim club. Paul Barton of Newton Square heard about the search while relaxing by his backyard pool and soon drove down to Darby Creek to join a search team. They searched a grassy hill together. As Barton recalled, all of us who were out searching had this very solemn feeling as we went in blind. Nobody found anything. Nobody was ever found. Nobody was found. Nobody found anything. Just 2 days after Gretchen went missing, police suspended their intensive search operation. Investigators had little information to go on, as one local newspaper quoted their chief as saying they hadn't got a clue. No useful clues whatsoever had been discovered by any search parties involved in the operation. Over the following weeks, police spoke with various individuals in an effort to piece together what had occurred with Gretchen. On August 17, 1975, interviews began for the investigation. Witness statements, camp teachers, students, parents, and police all provided key facts that assisted with solving her case. Important pieces of information included the sighting of either a green station wagon or light top, dark-bottom Cadillac, stopping to talk with a girl near Trinity Church. Furthermore, on August 15th, the daily camp routine was disrupted as Trinity Church members stayed 45 to 50 minutes longer than usual. On August 19th, Westchester police found a small pair of shorts belonging to Gretchen that David Zanstra had described, even though, according to him, she hadn't shown up at camp that day. Following this lead and realizing she hadn't arrived yet at camp either way, police interviewed Zanstra as part of their investigation. Investigators were left perplexed as to why Zanstra knew so many details about Gretchen's shorts, even when he hadn't actually seen her. Investigators interviewed Zanstra on August 19th and were told he had picked up some children to drive them to church on the day Gretchen went missing. However, he denied seeing her that day and did not become aware she was missing until Harold Harrington notified him at 11:05 a.m. about Gretchen being missing. Investigators inquired into several potential suspects, including known assaulters living nearby, but none led to an arrest. Gretchen's case became cold for many years thereafter. Joanna Falcon Sullivan was only 9 when Gretchen's murder took place and lived her childhood years in Broomall, Delaware County, an experience which would forever impact her. Later, she would become a journalist and author a true crime book detailing their investigation of Gretchen's case, which was published by Random House Publishing Group in 2022. Detective Sergeant Coffin became the lead investigator on Gretchen's case when a woman called Marple Police, requesting to speak with somebody about her daughter, Gretchen. Her message reached Coffin at Marple Township Police Headquarters, where it was received via voicemail. The woman stated she thought she knew who was responsible for Gretchen's situation, as well as an attempted kidnapping incident around that same time period. Additionally, she claimed she kept a diary when she was 10 years old, living 3 miles east of Marple called Havertown, that contained some information recorded from this information from when she lived 3 miles east in Havertown, which still existed today, in her possession after all these years. Sergeant Coffin reached out to Pennsylvania State Police. Although Gretchen had last been seen within Marple police jurisdiction, once her remains were discovered at State Park, the state police became the lead investigative agency. Coffin pointed out that there were only 4 detectives working his division, while state troopers could bring many more resources into play in their investigations. They scheduled an interview with an individual identified only by initials SF1, or as confidential informant in court documents indicating her as such. Interviewing SF was a landmark development in an unsolved cold case dating back nearly 50 years. She revealed she was childhood friends with Gretchen Harrington and Zoe Harrington, one of Gretchen's sisters. At David Zanstra's home, she often played with his 2 daughters, Mara and Kristen, often sleeping over at their residence, until one such sleepover awoke her in the middle of the night, with Pastor Zanstra touching her inappropriately. She shifted and he quickly left. But on another night, he touched her again. Even more disturbing was when Mara, his daughter, woke up the following day and heard of David Zanstra's odd behavior from SF. SF immediately mentioned David Zanstra to Mara as having odd behavior. Mara told SF that Mara often did this and often heard Gretchen crying in the middle of the night, prompting SF to report these incidents to her parents. When SF did so, they informed her she could no longer spend the night at Zanstra's. Notably, police believed this incident occurred exactly 1 week before Gretchen disappeared. Shortly thereafter, the Zanstras moved to Plano, Texas, a Dallas suburb, and shortly afterward, SF informed state police of her friendship with another child named Holly from their neighborhood, who she claimed had been targeted for kidnap by unknown individuals. SF wrote in her diary and gave it over to state troopers. Guess what? A man attempted to kidnap Holly twice. Unfortunately, this information must remain secret, but I think that person could also have abducted Gretchen. It could even be Mr. Z. SF verified to the troopers that Zanstra stood for Carl Zanstra. Back in 1975, local police interviewed Zanstra twice along with many others, and other witnesses claimed they saw Gretchen outside a car talking with someone sitting inside on the day she disappeared. These descriptions of cars seemed to fit one that Zanstra owned. Yet Zanstra always maintained he hadn't seen Gretchen on that particular day, even though he could provide accurate and detailed accounts of homemade shorts she wore that day. State troopers tracked Zanstra down to his lakefront home in Marietta, Georgia, where he and his wife had recently relocated. Zanstra agreed to meet them at the headquarters of Cobb County Police Department on July 17th for questioning. Initially, he denied any involvement with Gretchen's disappearance. However, when confronted with new allegations against him, including assaulting SF, Zanstra eventually opened up about what truly transpired on August 15, 1975 morning. Jack Stahlsteimer, the Delaware County District Attorney, detailed Zanstra's confession. Once Gretchen was no longer within her father's sight, Zanstra invited her into his green AMC Rambler station wagon and drove her instead to an isolated wooded area and asked her to strip naked before asking if she wanted to return home. When she declined and wanted to go home instead, he struck her with his fist, causing blood to pour from her head before feeling her pulse and seeing that she appeared lifeless. He then carried her out of his car, attempting to cover her body with sticks before leaving and carrying her home, once finished with his day's activities. Due to their close relationship, investigators determined that David Zanstra had all 3 elements needed for Gretchen's murder: means, motive, and opportunity. On July 17, 2023 in Georgia, he was taken into custody, where he is currently being held without being eligible for bail in Cobb County. A DNA sample was taken from him, which will be compared against DNA collected in Pennsylvania or across the nation. Given he worked with children for decades, this possibility seems likely. Phil Stoddard, a detective in Marietta, Georgia, who witnessed Zanstra's interview, reported to a television news crew that he found him emotionless during his confession to troopers. Eugene Trey conducted the interview and afterwards stated, "I don't know if he regrets what he has done, but this must have been a relief." On Monday, July 24, 2023, Delco officials announced the arrest of 83-year-old David Zanstra in connection with Gretchen's kidnapping and death. Zanstra, born May 1940 and still working as a pastor in Georgia at the time of his arrest, is every parent's worst nightmare. This horrific act left a family and community devastated forever, but at long last, David Zanstra has admitted his crime, giving us pride and gratefulness at finally providing answers. We must recognize that most people in this world are good, including pastors who claim to be men of God. However, there have been and always will be individuals who are cruel, cold-hearted, and just evil. Thank God there's law enforcement to hold these individuals accountable, no matter how long it takes. What happened to her is horrific, Stolzheimer explained. Stolzheimer also stated that Zanstra was appealing her extradition to Pennsylvania and that her office was seeking a governor's warrant to bring her back into Delaware County. Once approved, arrangements will be made to have representatives from the Delaware County Sheriff's Office pick up Zanstra and bring him back to Pennsylvania. Stolzheimer noted, "We will try him, convict him, and place him behind bars for life. After that, he will have to face what punishment our God holds in store for those who commit such evil against our children. He murdered a beloved young girl with just his bare hands before acting like she were his family friend during her burial and funeral, then continuing this practice long afterwards." Chief Graff of Marple Township Police said at Monday's press conference, "If you are someone who prays, please pray for Gretchen. She's already been put in God's hands. Additionally, you could send out prayers against those responsible as they will need our support as well." Zanstra's charges against her have provided Broomall, Pennsylvania, with some much-needed closure after nearly 48 years of grieving for Gretchen's case. Her death changed this community irrevocably. Pre-August 1975, it was just Anytown, USA. But post that day, things drastically shifted, as nobody could engage in activities as freely as before this occurred. Jim Cristaldi, who delivered newspapers to the Harringtons as a youth, recalled fondly of a pre-disappearance childhood spent building forts in the woods by moonlight with his friends before Gretchen vanished. Shortly thereafter, however, he joined search parties in those same woods in search for her or anything that might lead to her location. This completely shattered our innocence, Pennsylvania State Police Lieutenant Jonathan Sunderland declared in a statement. "Justice doesn't expire with time, whether a crime took place 50 years ago or 5 minutes ago. Residents in the Commonwealth can have faith that law enforcement will continue their pursuit until justice is served. Generations of detectives have worked on this case, and all deserve our sincerest appreciation for not giving up." Today we owe special acknowledgement to Corporal Andrew Martin from the Criminal Investigation Assessment Unit and Missing Persons Unit for his dedication in building upon the efforts of his predecessors, as well as his belief in solving this case. Without him, we would likely not be here today making this announcement. Michel Delon, President and CEO of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, noted, "Today's announcement demonstrates the strength of persistence, family commitment to justice, and law enforcement collaboration to bring closure in this case. We applaud their tireless work." As we celebrate this achievement, we recognize the outstanding contributions by the Delaware County District Attorney's Office, Pennsylvania State Police, Marple Township Police, with partner law enforcement agencies, Cobb County Police Department, as well as their unwavering dedication in this case, Michelle added. Days like today fuel our ongoing dedication to children's welfare, and Gretchen's family is at the forefront of our thoughts, as well as other families looking for answers. David Zanstra has been charged with first, second, and third-degree murder, as well as kidnapping a minor and possessing an instrument of crime for taking Gretchen Harrington's life in 3 separate incidents between 1965 and 2005. Zanstra served Trinity Chapel Christian Reformed Church in Broomall between those years, while also pastoring churches in California, Texas, New Jersey, and Missouri from 1965-2005. On Monday, the Christian Reformed Church issued a statement offering their condolences to her family. We are deeply dismayed to learn of a CRC pastor being charged in this incident. While violence exists everywhere, even within churches where we hold leaders to high standards. Margaret Zandstra, David Zandstra's wife, did not respond immediately to our request for comment after his arrest. Though many in Marple community now have most of the answers they had been searching for all these years, many residents still had not found peace after these dramatic developments unfolded. It was easy to assume this crime had been perpetrated by some outsider, some deranged offender who came from somewhere outside and grabbed up a young girl before fleeing just as swiftly with his evil. Instead, it turned out to be someone they trusted, a religious leader with his own family, including 2 daughters and wife, who brought dinner for his victim's family when he admitted killing her. Karen Frank Zetterberg, from Gretchen's Bible School. Everyone was amazed that Gretchen would get into a car with someone they didn't know back then, but now learning that such an evil being was lurking amongst us is sickening. While churches taught about evil existing in our world, you don't realize its depth until something like this happens, especially at such an early age. After hearing of Gretchen's case being finally brought to a potential closure, writer Kevin Sullivan was left stunned and excited at this news, yet still very sad as we know we cannot change what has already occurred. I conducted interviews with Zandstra, his wife and daughter, as research for my book. Zandstra had only vague memories of Gretchen going missing. Fear and apprehension spread through Broomall that day, and I recall witnessing a helicopter flying above our neighborhood in search of Gretchen, an image I will never forget. CBS News Philadelphia spoke with Sullivan last year after her book had just been published, asking whether she thought that it may have contributed to any breakthroughs in this case. Sullivan replied by explaining how interviewing people and visiting Marple Police Department enabled us to comb through cold case files kept by Chief Brandon Graff. He never gave up trying to solve this unsolved case. Marple Police encouraged our research and stated we somehow contributed. I think we got people talking again. Reverend Zandstra answered many of our inquiries regarding that day. There was much relief and disbelief as it happened. David. Zandstra's neighbors in Georgia also reacted when learning of his charges against him. Karen Halsdorf expressed her surprise. She never knew anything was going on between them, describing them as always being very nice people, and finding out now they had been charged with something. Aaron Christian agreed, saying they found David to be friendly enough, having spoken with him several times when walking around town with a cane in hand. Gretchen Harrington's family issued the following statement in response to today's arrest. With today's announcement of an arrest warrant being issued against those responsible for this horrific act against our daughter Gretchen Harrington, we were extremely hopeful that those responsible would face justice. As we move closer to justice, it is difficult to express all of the emotions we are feeling as this case moves forward. Gretchen was only 8 years old when she was taken from us suddenly on Friday, August 15, 1975, while heading for church. If you had met Gretchen before this tragic event happened, chances are you were instantly her friend. She exuded kindness towards all, was sweet and gentle, and even now when people discuss memories of her, the first thing people mention is how amazing she was and still is. At just 8 years old, she left an impactful legacy upon those she came into contact with. Gretchen's kidnap and death have irrevocably changed our family, and we miss her every day. We appreciate law enforcement's persistent pursuit of justice, in particular, Pennsylvania State Police for being there day in and day out to search for answers. As a family, we would not be here today without them. At this time, we kindly request privacy as we absorb this news. Thank you for understanding, love, and ongoing support. It means so much to us. Gretchen's parents were married for an impressive 59 years, until her father passed away at an astonishing age of 94. Officials noted that Zandstra was known to move around a lot between various churches during his 4-decade career, living in California, Texas, and Georgia during that period. Stolsteiner expressed concern that additional victims may have been assaulted by Zandstra and held accountable. They demanded anyone with information, or suspecting David Zandstra, ever committed an act against you, Contact District Attorney Geoffrey Payne or Pennsylvania State Police. What was supposed to be a 10-minute stroll down the road became a cold case that gripped an entire community for nearly 50 years. On August 15, 1975, at approximately 11:23 a.m., David Zanstra, a minister and the leader of a summer Bible camp, called Marple Police Department to report that an 8-year-old named Gretchen Harrington had gone missing. She left her home in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, with the intention of walking half a mile or less towards camp. Unfortunately, she never arrived. An immediate search effort ensued, but was fruitless. 2 months later, on October 14, 1975, Gretchen's remains were discovered in Ridley Creek State Park, near her hometown. Yet this shocking find left the community bewildered and uncertain, as no conclusions had yet been reached regarding what had transpired in Gretchen's disappearance and death. Marple Township in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, United States had over 23,000 people residing within its boundaries as of 2015. Attractive attractions for visitors in Marple Township include Buma Fields and Marple Gardens. It boasts an overall lower crime rate than the national average, and its crime score of rice 17 makes it one of Pennsylvania's safest towns. Gretchen Harrington's story began here. Born to Harold Boyd Harrington and Ina Harrington on June 13, 1967, Gretchen Eleanor Harrington would go on to work as a minister at a Presbyterian church. At that time, Jacqueline Morgan has vivid memories of an event which would grip Delaware County for 48 years before finally concluding its investigation in August 1975. When 8-year-old Gretchen vanished from Lawrence Road home, and hundreds were mobilized into search parties shortly afterwards. "Do you remember any kind of time where people were afraid to let their kids out?" she replied. "Yes, definitely. People were definitely afraid to let their kids out at that point." Gretchen had 2 older sisters named Zoe and Harriet, whom her family described as warm and loving individuals. By 1975, at age 8, Gretchen was attending 2nd grade at Delaware County Christian School in Newtown Square, where things seemed to be going smoothly until tragedy intervened in her life and family's lives. On August 15, 1975, Gretchen set off from home to attend a summer Bible camp program held at 2 locations: Trinity Church Chapel, where David Zanstra was pastor, and the Reformed Presbyterian Church, where Harold Harrington served as pastor. Daily activities took place at both churches before David transported children between them. 2 families familiar to each other that resided nearby, and both employed pastors, with both mothers fulfilling traditional pastor-wife roles, one being Gretchen's best friend from Zanstra's household. Gretchen was on an unexpected journey. Her usual path consisted of walking to summer Bible camp program with her 2 sisters Zoe, 12, and Harriet, 11. But on this particular day was anything but typical. Gretchen found herself alone while Zoe and Harriet, 12 and 11, were off walking their usual routes together to camp. Zoe and Harriet decided to stay back that day, as their mother Ina had recently given birth and was taking Jessica home, so Zoe and Harriet decided not to follow. Harold, Gretchen's father, insisted she attend Bible camp to maintain her perfect attendance record, and so Gretchen started walking alone to Bible camp. At just after 9 a.m., she set off up Lawrence Road towards Trinity with her father's encouragement, never knowing it would be the last time he saw his daughter alive. Harold kept an eye out as they traversed Lawrence Road, but little did he realize this would be their last interaction ever. Marple was known as an exceptionally safe suburb during the 1970s, so seeing children walking alone on hot summer days without fear was entirely normal. People rarely considered danger when children played until late at night in its streets and woods, with even Darby Creek flowing behind Gretchen's home, providing cool relief on hot afternoons. They would freely roam all these areas before strolling over to friends' houses, blocks away, without needing their cell phone for safety or GPS watches to stay connected with parents, a large reason many longtime Philadelphians decided to move there in its 60s. Gretchen had planned to be at Trinity Chapel Christian Reformed Church by 9:30 a.m., but never arrived as scheduled. Harold noticed her absence at around 11 a.m. after realizing several of Gretchen's friends had come knocking at his residence looking for her, but were unable to locate her classes or anywhere nearby. Harold took swift action, contacting Trinity Chapel Christian Reformed Church, where Maggie Zanstra, David Zanstra's wife, attempted to contact the Marple Township Police Department regarding Gretchen, but she hadn't been seen. David then reported her as missing. Gretchen's disappearance sent shockwaves through Broomall and Marple Township on August 16, 1975. By August 17th, an extensive search effort involving hundreds of people had begun in an effort to locate her. Volunteer firefighters and canine units swept both sides of the creek, fields, and wooded areas, while a Pennsylvania State Police helicopter provided aerial coverage. However, just 2 days later, Gretchen went missing. The police had to call off their large-scale search operation due to limited information available to them. Daniel Hennessy, the police chief in this town, candidly admitted to a local newspaper that they were at a loss as to her whereabouts, sending shock waves through the entire community and shattering its sense of safety. People were clearly fearful to let their children out at that time. Remember when people were afraid to let their kids out? That time was certainly frightening. People were fearful. Friends and family of Gretchen began handing out flyers featuring her most recent school photo, featuring a missing tooth and her childish smile, to passing motorists in the area. Unfortunately, no information had surfaced, leading to widespread speculation and numerous unanswered questions, such as did she run away, drown in a creek accidentally, be abducted by strangers, or was it someone familiar? Everyone remained deeply worried and perplexed over Gretchen's absence. After Gretchen disappeared, police began gathering information and gathering details of what transpired surrounding her disappearance. One officer worked hard at gathering this data before providing it to a criminal prosecutor for review. On August 19th, they spoke with David. At this interview, David revealed that he had taken several children to church on the day Gretchen went missing. However, he stated he hadn't seen her himself on that particular day. Gretchen Harrington's sisters, Zoe and Harriet Harrington, returned to Delaware County Christian School as August turned into September. However, their fellow students found it difficult to approach or engage them in conversation due to being uncertain what words could comfort such an emotionally draining situation. After traditional investigative methods produced no leads in their search for Gretchen, police decided to pursue an unconventional avenue. They called upon psychic Judith Richardson for help. Judith had used her psychic powers to assist law enforcement with nearly 100 criminal cases involving missing children and made predictions she hoped would prove incorrect. According to her psychic insights, she believed Gretchen had died. 1 month later, on October 14, 1975, while exploring Ridley Creek State Park by jogging, an innocent jogger discovered a decaying body hidden amongst the forest. While initially confused as to what they had encountered, their uncertainty quickly dissipated once they saw that one fingernail belonged to a human being. Realizing the gravity of his situation, the jogger contacted police immediately. Gretchen's parents examined her clothing found with her remains and confirmed it belonged to their daughter. Later on, medical examiner matched up her body using dental records as well. Gretchen's death had tragically resulted from homicide. A forensic examination revealed multiple fractures to her skull that pointed to severe beating. While police initially suspected abuse as the source, an autopsy failed to provide concrete proof supporting this claim. On Sunday, October 19, 1975, just days after Gretchen was found, her father Harold stood before a pulpit and gave a powerfully emotional sermon, recalling the devotion and faith that Gretchen held dear. In it, he spoke of Gretchen's relationship to Christ, as she now was free of this world, while her killer would remain haunted by their deed. Her funeral was conducted solemnly, and David officiated the service before her body was laid to rest at Meridian Line Cemetery, located Johannesburg, Michigan, USA. Once Gretchen's body had been discovered in the woods, her death reignited renewed excitement regarding this investigation. Witnesses began coming forward, providing accounts of various individuals they had seen near where her remains had been located. Eyewitness reports provided descriptions of men seen loitering around. As a result, police received many tips from community members, some more promising than others, while some proved unrelated to justice pursuit. Investigators focused on interviewing a range of possible suspects, as well as those with prior criminal histories residing nearby. But no significant leads emerged despite these efforts. Consequently, an evidence box at Marpley Township Police Department headquarters began gathering dust. Inside this box contained real-time interviews, photographs, and memoranda relevant to this investigation that were all sitting idle due to lack of progress on it. After some time had passed, the investigation into Gretchen's disappearance became cold. At roll call meetings or when detectives had spare moments during an otherwise mundane week, they would revisit the case, looking through its file in hope of discovering something they missed before. But this effort often resulted in dead ends with no breakthroughs in sight for this missing girl case. Over several decades, nothing new occurred with Gretchen's disappearance case. All of the original detectives involved either died or retired from working it. But in 2022, there was an unexpected turn of events. An unknown woman approached the Marple Police Department, seeking to speak about Gretchen's disappearance and murder. At that time, Sergeant Nick Coffin had taken charge of Gretchen's cold case investigation. So when this woman called Marple Police, her message was forwarded directly to Coffin. The individual indicated they believed they had information regarding who might have caused Gretchen's tragic fate, and also alluded to an attempted kidnapping incident that may be linked to this case. On January 2, 2023, state troopers received an unexpected contact that gave hope of solving Gretchen's disappearance and death. On that date, they scheduled an interview with SF, who identified herself as a confidential informant. This meeting would prove pivotal in breaking a cold case that had persisted for almost 50 years. SF told investigators she had been schoolmates of both Gretchen and one of her sisters, Zoe. Additionally, SF revealed to investigators that she was friends with David Zanstra's daughters and would often visit his home, sometimes staying overnight on occasion. SF was 10 when she attended one of these sleepovers with David. Alarmed at his unwanted touch, she shifted positions quickly and caused him to flee the room immediately. Alarmingly, this inappropriate touching recurred again the next night. After awakening in the morning with her girls, SF confided in David's daughter about his distressful actions. Much to SF's surprise, David's daughter replied with something along these lines: "He does that sometimes." Over time, SF worked up the courage to share her distressful experience with both of her parents. Following Gretchen's disappearance, the Zanstra family relocated from Texas's Gulf Coast region to Plano as an immediate response. SF told this interviewer her experiences during that move as well. SF also shared information with state police about another child in her neighborhood named Holly, who she considered a friend, alleging someone attempted to kidnap Holly. As the conversation unfolded, SF made certain comments concerning Holly that could indicate danger and threatened abduction attempts against Holly by others. As the discussion developed further, SF decided not to inform state police of anything regarding Holly at that time. Investigators were presented with a diary she had kept during her childhood. On September 15, 1975, she detailed 2 attempted kidnapping attempts from someone whom she identified as Mr. Z. Her suspicion was that Mr. Z, whom she identified as David at that point in time. SF's revelation added another critical piece to the investigation into Gretchen's disappearance and murder, prompting investigators to locate 83-year-old David, now living in Marietta, near Atlanta, in Georgia. On July 17, 2023, Andrew Martin and Eugene Trey conducted an interview with David at Cobb County Police Headquarters in Marietta. This interview had to be carried out immediately afterwards due to time restrictions imposed by Georgia authorities. Conversation began on a cordial note. David initially denied having seen Gretchen on her last day of absence from home, but things quickly escalated when David learned of allegations of assault by someone who documented their experiences in their diary. Eventually, David broke down and revealed something truly horrifying in response. David told police he saw Gretchen walking towards church early that morning, offering her a ride in his green AMC Rambler station wagon, and she accepting it without question. Instead of driving them directly to church as promised, however, David admitted to investigators he drove Gretchen instead to an isolated wooded area, parked the car there, instructed Gretchen to undress, but when she refused, David struck her with his fist, which resulted in head injuries and bleeding before fleeing the area. Believing Gretchen dead before trying to cover her partially unclothed body by using sticks before leaving the area, before finally fleeing, before leaving her partially unclad body behind, before leaving. At first, this revelation left detectives reeling as they processed all the horrifying details that David revealed during his confession about Gretchen. Following this shocker of an admission by David, he was arrested and now facing serious charges including criminal homicide and first-degree murder as a result of his admissions regarding her. Tonight on ACD News, however, is the big story about an 8-year-old girl's murder in Delaware County. David VRA is an absolute monster, every parent's worst nightmare. But today, 83-year-old David Zanstra has finally been apprehended. According to prosecutors, he abducted and murdered Gretchen Harrington back in 1975 as she approached a Bible camp where he served as pastor. While David's confession provided some closure for Gretchen, it also raised a disturbing possibility. Could this man who openly admitted killing one girl and harming others have other victims? Prior to his move to Marple, David served as pastor at Trinity Presbyterian Church in Flanders for several years, where he had become known for opposing inclusion of sexuality education into local school curriculums. After discovering Gretchen's remains, David moved his family and pastored a church near Dallas called Plano Church near Plano, Texas, for 7 years before taking up duties at Living Faith Community Church of San Diego, before retiring at 65 from Fairfield Church near Sacramento in 2005. Authorities recognized that his extended leadership had provided him with immense influence and access to young and vulnerable individuals, prompting questions regarding the extent of his actions during these years. Marple residents had finally received some of the answers they'd been searching for decades, yet their shocking turn of events did not bring peace to many residents. Many felt more comforted thinking an outsider, such as an unsavory criminal, had committed this devastating act. Someone who had entered randomly into town, abducted a young girl without warning, and then vanished as quickly. Yet instead, it turned out that their perpetrator was someone from within their community, an influential religious leader with his own wife and young daughters, which further disoriented residents' sense of security within. Gretchen's family issued a statement, thanking law enforcement officials for their dedication in investigating her tragic murder and hoping that those responsible would face consequences. Following David's arrest, his legal team initially objected to extradition proceedings. However, Delaware County District Attorney Jack Stoll-Steer sought assistance from Governor Josh Shapiro's office for this process of extradition back to Pennsylvania. David is currently being investigated for any potential instances of abuse beyond this case, while investigators also obtained his DNA sample, which may prove instrumental in aiding them with investigating other missing persons, as well as cases involving assault and murder across the nation. As we conclude this heart-wrenching case, one cannot help but reflect on all its complex layers and twists over the years. What challenges await Gretchen's family as they attempt to find closure and healing after such a long wait? Likewise, what kind of justice do you think David deserves for his actions, and how might his arrest impact future cases of abuse? 16-year-old Kimberly Liesel lived in Livingston County, Michigan, in 1982. She loved poetry and spending time with her sisters. On March 20th, 1982, Kimberly left her boyfriend's home and called her mom from a gas station payphone to tell her she was on her way home. She decided to hitchhike, something she had done before. She started in the area of 8 Mile and Inner Roads, and she got a ride to the area of 8 Mile and Merriman Roads in Livonia. At around 6:30 p.m., she made at least 4 phone calls trying to find a ride the rest of the way home. Sadly, Kimberly never made it back home, and she was not seen alive again. Her family searched for her, tracked down her friends, but could not find any trace of her. She was reported missing to the Green Oak Township Police Department the next day. Kimberly Liesel's mother said police kept asking her about her daughter being a runaway, but she was not a runaway. She was on her way home. Joanna Liesel said the days turned into weeks, and then her body was found on April 14, 1982. Kimberly Liesel's body was found behind a park and ride in the Island Lake Recreation Area near Grand River Avenue and Kensington Road, just 5 miles from her home. She had been assaulted, beaten, and strangled, and her personal belongings were not located. An autopsy revealed that even though she had been missing for more than 3 weeks, she lost her life 4 or 5 days before being found. Investigators with the Green Oak Township Police Department exhausted all leads before the case went cold. Kimberly's sister, Cindy Authors, dedicated herself to helping track down the perpetrator. About 15 years ago, I had just started Googling her name to see if I could find anything on her, and I found 2 really old articles that did not have the right information. Cindy Author said, "That kind of upset me that I could not find any information on it. It was like she just did not exist, so that was where I started because I wanted to correct the wrong information, and then it just went from there." Cindy Author started a Facebook page to share information about the case, posted flyers, and tracked down her sister's friends. She became a pseudo-detective. Kimberly's case got a new set of eyes recently when Michigan State University students, taking part in a cold case internship with Michigan State Police, took interest. The students sifted through boxes of evidence and files, and there was a name that caught their eye: Charles David Shaw. Back in 1983, someone had tipped police that Shaw had lived in the area where Kimberly Liesel lived, and they said he had recently destroyed his apartment, which they thought was suspicious. Police took note but never tracked Shaw down. That was interesting because in early 2023, Livingston County cold case investigators announced Shaw as the suspect in the 1983 slaying of 19-year-old Christina Caston. Christina lived with her mother and father in Redford Township at the time of her disappearance. She was last seen between 7:30 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. on March 19, 1983, walking westbound on 5 Mile Road near Lola Park in Redford Township. Her mother reported her missing on March 21, 1983, and her body was found on March 29, 1983, in the Oak Grove State Game Area on Forest Road in Deerfield Township. Police were able to obtain DNA from Christina's body in March 2022. Investigators applied and received grant funding through Season of Justice, a non-profit organization dedicated to funding DNA testing on unsolved cold cases. In May 2022, the DNA evidence was sent to AAM Lab in Texas, the company behind DNA Solves. AAM used the genealogical profile to identify leads in the case and turned that evidence over to investigators. Investigators said through that work and cooperation from the suspect's family, they were able to identify beyond a reasonable doubt who the perpetrator was. The cooperation of the Shaw family during the investigation was paramount to identifying Charles Shaw as the person responsible for what had happened to Christina Caston. Livingston County investigators said in a press release that investigators then began focusing on Shaw as a suspect in Kimberly Liesel's case. They created maps of areas where he was known to spend time, like where he lived and where he worked, and they discovered that those locations surrounded Kimberly's location. Investigators did a property audit on all the property and all the evidence that they had in the case. The students and detectives took that evidence to the Michigan State Police Crime Lab and asked for it to be retested. They were hoping for a miracle, and then, 4 months later, they got a hit. DNA was found on one of the items that had been collected from the crime scene. The DNA had been among the evidence for 40 years and had gone unnoticed. The cell was uploaded into the system and linked to Shaw. The announcement came in September 2023, and investigators believe Shaw kidnapped Kimberly while she was walking. Police said they are 100% confident that Charles David Shaw is responsible for taking the life of Kimberly Liesel. Shaw's body was found in Detroit on November 27, 1983. and the medical examiner's report listed the cause as accidental asphyxiation. Unfortunately, there will never really be justice. Shaw had several interactions with law enforcement beginning at a young age. One such interaction resulted in his arrest in 1981 for the attempted abduction of a woman in the Phil McDonald's parking lot. Detectives are exploring the possibility that Shaw is responsible for additional crimes during the early 1970s, until his end in November 1983. On April 7, 1959, Joseph and Elisa Bellino welcomed their fourth child into this world. They named him Brad, the tiniest bundle of joy they'd ever laid eyes upon. Growing up, Brad became known as the baby of his family, growing up alongside two older brothers and one older sister. However, his connection with his siblings remained undisruptible, built over years of laughter, tears, and mischief-making. From an early age, Brad was drawn to adventure. His insatiable curiosity drove him forward as he explored unknown territories or tried new experiences, something which kept Brad upbeat and excited by life. Never one to back down from a challenge, Brad never hesitated when presented with one. Brad was very outgoing. We both took risks, but he often initiated them and I always agreed, explained Don Templeman, Brad's close friend and confidant. In reality, Don and Brad shared an excellent relationship. At what point exactly they became friends remains unclear, though their bond probably began after meeting at Boardman Center Middle School, where they both were students. Both shared an appreciation of adventure which bound them together. It eventually kept them apart as well. Children often rode bikes through town, discovering every corner and crevice possible. A favorite location was Boardman Mall, where they would meet friends to exchange gossip and exchange news of what's new in school life. But their thirst for exploration didn't end there. These children also hitchhiked often. The two boys shared an interest in rocks and gemstones and would visit a rock and gem shop near Brad's house frequently to marvel at its breathtaking display of rocks and minerals. Not only did their shared love for adventure bring them together, Don's father served as their coach. Soon enough, these two became regular house guests for each other. Brad and Don lived just 3 miles apart, making it easy for them to meet whenever desired. Don would head over to Brad's house every Friday night, where they would head off to the cinema together. Brad lived near a cinema, so every Friday and Saturday they'd walk there together, discussing new movies they were looking forward to watching and what adventures lay in wait for them over the weekend. However, on Saturdays, Brad would visit Don at Applewood Acres for a sleepover party. These two would spend their evenings playing games and talking late into the night. On Sunday mornings, Don and Brad joined his family for church, an important tradition that only deepened their bonds further. His mother would usually drive Brad home after this service was complete, before saying their goodbyes with hopes that another sleepover was soon coming up. Don and Brad found these weekends to be filled with pure happiness and friendship. They cherished every second they spent together, living life to its fullest and all its adventures. But then something devastating occurred, changing everything forever. Brad, 12, and Don, 11, who were 6th graders, were excited about having some time off school and spending it together. Soon enough, they met up and set off exploring as usual before becoming disturbed when a brown van began following them around everywhere they went. The boys first thought it was mere coincidence, but when it continued happening over and over, it turned from playful into fearful. Sensing danger, they acted swiftly to head back towards Don's house in order to escape the mysterious vehicle. At that time, it had begun to set, and it seemed wiser for them to return home after such a long day. Little did they know their day was far from over. Brad was eager to begin an enjoyable evening at Don's home when the phone rang, only for it to be answered by his father demanding that he come home immediately, before reluctantly breaking the news to Don that he needed to leave. Due to circumstances beyond his control, Don was at a grocery store when Joseph, Brad's father, called and therefore couldn't take him home as usual. Additionally, his own father was sick in bed, so Brad was forced to travel alone, home from his destination. At dusk and after 7:30 p.m., Brad decided to walk back home. Before long, he bid farewell to Don, as they said their farewells and waved goodbye through the door as he left. These would likely be Don's last memories of him alive. Joseph had spent much of the evening out late, and when he returned, had no inkling that Brad was missing. He assumed he'd returned from his outing to find Brad sleeping peacefully inside, and had simply gone back out again, only to be surprised to discover his world had just been turned upside down. Elisa was away on an important work trip in Cleveland during this fateful day, unaware of what was transpiring back home. On Saturday morning of April 1st, 1972, which was also a Saturday, Joseph took advantage of sleeping until noon before realizing something was amiss. Brad was nowhere to be found. With growing concern, he called Templeman's house and learned he'd left their residence the previous evening at around 7:30 p.m. without anyone reporting him as missing. Hearing this information brought an immediate feeling of unease. Joseph dialed them immediately as well to confirm what he'd heard earlier from Brad himself. They hadn't seen or heard from him since then. Joseph's heart pounded as he hung up the phone. Where was Brad? Knowing it was urgent that he find his son quickly, Joseph immediately ran from home and began searching his neighborhood, calling out his name in desperation and hopelessness, until finally midday came along and Joseph made a call to 911 for assistance. He reported that Brad, whom he dearly loved, had gone missing. Soon thereafter, word spread quickly around town of his disappearance. Elisa was devastated upon hearing the news. No trace had been found of her son despite an intensive police and volunteer search effort that included both departments. Brad's disappearance quickly reached the media, and local newspapers soon joined in the search efforts. They published a detailed description of Brad, hoping someone might recognize him. They described him as 4 feet 8 inches in height and 80 pounds in weight, with striking blue eyes and short blonde hair that fell below his ears. Last seen wearing blue jeans. Tony DePolito, his first cousin from Youngstown and police officer himself, knew something had to be done when news of Brad's disappearance reached him. So he joined search efforts in Boardman with hopes of finding and returning his cousin safely home. Unfortunately, their efforts had no success, as it seemed as though Brad had simply vanished into thin air, leaving his loved ones heartbroken and the community feeling vulnerable. His absence created an air of uncertainty around town, which hasn't subsided since. Paul Smith, a sanitation worker, began his regular trash collection routine on April 4, 1972 at Isali's dairy store when he noticed something unnerving. The dumpster was partially full with sneakers sticking up at an odd angle and partially filled. Closer inspection revealed the body of a young boy, covered in cardboard boxes from Isali's dairy store waste. His head lay downward, with his neck tightly fastened by an iron belt. Paul immediately made calls to authorities to report what he found there. Paul found himself overwhelmed by what he saw, so he immediately called the police, who arrived within moments. Once inside the dumpster and witnessed a small body lying therein, which may or may not have been that of the missing boy they had been searching for, they felt despair. They immediately reached out to Tony, who had also been helping searchers locate his cousin, asking him for identification assistance in order to confirm its identification as theirs. Tony quickly arrived on the scene and confirmed the horror. The body in the dumpster belonged to Tony's beloved cousin Brad. With heavy hearts, Tony removed and transported Brad's remains to Southside Hospital for autopsy, then faced the heartbreaking task of informing Brad's parents of this devastating news. Tony described how tragic this event had been for his Aunt Elisa and the entire family. You never truly recover from something like this happening to someone close to you. Don was in school when his teacher broke the news of Brad's passing away. Shock and grief hit hard. It took several minutes before Don could even process what had just occurred. While Brad's family and friends were reeling from the shock of his tragic death, results of the autopsy were released. According to the coroner's report, Brad had been strangled to death and subjected to some form of physical abuse before passing away at 9 p.m. on Saturday, April 1st, over 24 hours after he had last been seen alive. These details only compounded their grief. Police initiated an immediate investigation to identify those responsible. As part of their efforts, Don was called into the station, where he was shown Brad's clothing that matched what he was wearing when leaving Don's house. Don confirmed this was correct, and when shown his own belt found on Brad, he identified it as belonging to Brad himself. Don couldn't get his mind off of seeing a brown van on Brad's day of disappearance, which may have had something to do with his death. Don believed this might have played some part. Don, as part of his investigation into Brad's murder, suggested that someone within that van may have waited until Brad was in a dark area before seizing him. Following this tragedy, members from across town came together for his funeral, attended by pupils from his school, as well as parents and teachers, all mourning his sudden departure far too soon. Almost the whole community seemed united in its sorrow. Sadness permeated the air in an outpouring of sadness. After Brad's death, Boardman never seemed the same again. Don and his family could no longer bear to live with reminders of this tragic event, so they decided it was time for a change and decided to relocate their family from Minnesota to Tennessee and start over from scratch. 2 months after Brad's funeral service, they packed their belongings and left Boardman forever. Days turned to weeks and then months, and the investigation into Brad's death seemed to progress no further. Even after following up numerous leads and interviewing several suspects, detectives assigned to this case kept hitting dead ends at every turn. Tony recalls of the investigation into Brad's death as being one of absolute nothing. Overtime, hope of justice being done for Brad wanted rapidly, and eventually vanished altogether. In 2001, Boardman's former police chief Jeffrey Patterson refused to let Brad's case die quietly. Instead, he took bold action by reopening it, dispatching detectives to exhume Brad's body for DNA evidence collection and taking Brad's clothing as evidence for submission at the State Bureau of Criminal Identification and Investigation, BCII. On closer examination, however, forensic scientists discovered something that dismayed them: DNA that did not belong to Brad. The discovery provided new life to the investigation as detectives set about searching for justice without compromise. Yet, despite their best efforts, the investigation stalled for several years. In 2007, Police Chief Jeffrey decided to assign the case of Brad's disappearance to 2 new detectives, Jack Nichols and Bob Rupp. Nichols had grown up near where Brad went missing in 1972. At 14, he witnessed what became a tragic event, so this case had always lingered with him. Now it was finally time for justice for Brad, so he promised himself that this case would receive all his effort and dedication. Nichols and Rupp began the investigation immediately upon being assigned the task, diving headfirst into sorting through mountains of paperwork and boxes of poorly organized evidence. While this task proved challenging, the two forged ahead in making the best use of their time, looking through files, eventually noticing 7 individuals' names pop up repeatedly as persons of interest that might ultimately become suspects, but without enough concrete evidence, they couldn't yet be considered such. However, Nichols and Rupp did not give up. They quickly obtained search warrants and set about serving them, collecting DNA samples from each of those involved and sending them off for testing in hopes that any would match up with what had been discovered on Brad's clothing. But their hopes were dashed when none did. None could match with Brad. Under such adversity, Nichols and Rupp were back at square one, yet they refused to give up on finding answers. Instead, they diligently combed through case files in an effort to unearth new leads. Unfortunately, their efforts yielded nothing new. After years of working on the case together, however, Nichols and Rupp retired while another team took over their investigations. Albert Kekasik led an experienced Boardman police captain team. Armed with fresh eyes and perspectives, this investigation would soon take an unexpected turn. Boardman police detectives understood that advanced technology would be required to analyze the DNA found on Brad's clothing. In 2018, they turned to Virginia-based DNA technology firm Parabon Nanolabs, which utilized familial DNA matching methods to narrow down suspects to those sharing similar physical traits or family trees. Over 4 years, detectives labored tirelessly, gathering DNA samples from individuals identified by Parabon as possibly related to Joseph Norman Hill and performing DNA tests on them. With help of these tests, they narrowed their search to specific branches of an extended family tree while eliminating others. Eventually, all their hard work paid off with Joseph Norman Hill becoming their target. Follow this lead. Detectives worked diligently to locate Hill and collect DNA samples for testing. Testing Hill's relative revealed an almost 99.2% likelihood that Brad's clothes contained Hill's DNA, suggesting they had finally located the person responsible. Unfortunately, however, Hill passed away due to cancer and had since been cremated, which prevented further testing being conducted on his remains to ascertain his guilt. Detectives were taken aback as they dug deeper into Joseph Norman Hill's life, discovering both that he had gone undetected all these years, but also his living situation at the time of Brad's murder. 32 and living on Shadyside Drive in Boardman, with no known connections to Brad or his family, driving for a bottled water company before moving out west in 1978 for work purposes, driving truck for them until eventually moving permanently in 1978 when relocated for employment opportunities there in California. Yet no connection between him or Brad himself and Brad or his family, leaving detectives baffled. His only brush with law being an arrest charge from 1986 for disorderly conduct and solicitation for conduct related to rude acts committed in Los Angeles that year. Gina Deganova of Mahoning County Prosecution Services was charged with reviewing all the evidence compiled by Boardman police in Brad's murder case. Her team carefully examined every piece of information until they reached an understanding that Joseph Norman Hill could present all this to a grand jury without fear. This marked a massive breakthrough for this investigation and finally allowed detectives to relax knowing their hard work had paid off. Boardman Police Chief Todd Worth revealed during a press conference held on January 24, 2023, that Brad's family had chosen not to make any public statements and requested space and privacy during this difficult period of their healing journey. Any additional disturbance from media intrusion or further disturbance would only add further distress for them and disrupt their healing journey further. Terra Alta, West Virginia's Unassuming town, took it into its rolling hills, offers up an unforgettable experience. Boasting just over 400 residents and plenty of charm, Terra Alta stands out as an idyllic small community